it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. The Lord of the Feast. Endgame. Part 1. I don't know what it's like for other people, but I was finding that the more insanity I was exposed to, the quicker it rolled off me. Perhaps it's like developing an immunity to poison. Small doses over time allow you to withstand a lethal dose later. As such, I'd achieved a certain level of zen by the time Madison and I returned to Colby Hall with Laszlo and Theo in tow. Thoughts about talkative reapers and the blending, and something called the Lord, became just bits of information I was relaying to my comrades. The emotion behind the thoughts, the horror, had diminished to a distant anxiety for now. I knew it wouldn't last, but I relished my moment of inner calm just the same. Laszlo was still snapping Polaroids as I finished my debriefing, having flashed a camera over every inch of the interior. Theo had his focus on the entrance to the underground. He dropped a new glow stick down the hole and then looked my way, shaking his head. "Hector, you're the only guy I know who could charm a reaper into not eating you." "Yeah, especially one you shut up," commented Madison in a very distracted tone. She'd switched out her sniper rifle for an assault weapon and had taken position next to the rungs that led down into the hole. Her face wore a level of wariness I'd never seen before, her eyes never leaving the opening. I gave them a hard glare. "Oh, glad you two find this funny. You do realize this Reaper is the one that killed Abbott?" Theo's face showed me he hadn't forgotten that for one moment. "And trust me, Hector, I'd like nothing more than to finish what we started with that one." "Yeah, same here," said Laszlo, moving to join us while shaking a fistful of Polaroid pictures around absently. "I have some explosives with its name on it. Seriously, I paint the word Reaper on all my drone bombs now." "I took away someone we all cared about," Theo said. "But if this creature is willing to help us, we're going to have to put revenge to the side for now." I hadn't expected such pragmatism from Theo, not after his refusal to endorse my previous plan. He must have noticed my confusion. "Oh, I hate saying this, but Madison was right." He shook his head again. "The time for playing it safe is over." "Theo agreeing with me?" commented Madison. "Maybe it is the end of the world." She absently tossed a fourth stick down the manhole, even though the tunnel below was already covered in a lively green glow. "Here's another sobering thought," continued Madison. "I'm not sold on the idea that Reapers eat people's brains. It's never been confirmed, but if they do, and they get knowledge from the consumption, well, it makes sense that this Reaper would seek our team out, don't you think?" Laszlo's face scrunched up with uncertainty. "I've been arguing this point for over a year now. Does this mean you're going to admit that I'm right?" "Well, I'm admitting that it might explain this Reaper's behavior," said Madison. Laszlo seemed satisfied with this admission. She then moved my way and asked for the iPad. I was surprised she hadn't asked for it sooner. I suspected she wanted to savor it, make it her cherry on top of a forensic sundae. "Just don't erase anything," I teased. Laszlo stuck her tongue out at me, took hold of the iPad and started in. Madison's frown-heavy demeanor deepened as she watched Laszlo go to work. "If the Reaper wants Hector to give this device to our leadership, I'd say that's a solid reason not to." "What, you think it's rigged to explode?" I spoke. "I don't know what to think," Madison confessed. "But the fact that the Reaper didn't kill you doesn't mean it's on our side. We did just kill one of its own. For all we know, this is some type of asymmetrical warfare. This iPad could be a beacon for ML Death Squad." "I think it's mostly videos," said Laszlo, holding the pad up to us as a video played. A grim look materialized on her face. "Well, like this one." We watched silently as the video showed a scene of an old homestead out in the middle of nowhere. The camera holder had to be hiding in a bush or some tall grass, as vegetation occasionally clouded the picture. The shot was also a little on the shaky side, and something kept grunting at weird intervals, but the operator proved competent enough to keep the shot centered on the house. There was a truck parked next to it, and with a flash of alarm I recognized it as the vehicle the Betas had used to transport their prisoners. If that wasn't enough, I watched as several figures reluctantly filed out of the house toward the truck. It's the same people we'd rescued days ago, being escorted by the same bastards we'd killed. Before anyone had a chance to comment, Laszlo zipped her fingers to another file and played it. This one showed the battle at the cabbage farm. At first the fight was cast from a fair distance, Madison and I exchanging gunfire with the rogue SAS team while Laszlo's drone buzz-bombed the Humvee. Then a chorus of savage howls started up, drowning out the battlefield noise. The picture began to shake and swivel wildly as the camera holder grew distracted, perhaps excited. The final shot was the worst. A stampede of MLs sweeping by the camera, holding and snarling and thirsting for blood, while the camera operator reversed its grip so that the lens was facing it. If there was any doubt left as to who had been manning the iPad, the sight of those two black orbs front and center in the video dispelled it. Laszlo stopped the playback as we processed this newest bit of disquieting knowledge. So, they can make recordings now, said Theo, rubbing his head uneasily. Our Reaper turncoat can, at least, Laszlo offered. I think it was showing its work to us. That bastard is responsible for the farm debacle, Madison commented quietly, her eyes growing narrow. Theo asked Laszlo if there was more. She showed us a folder with several dozen video files in it. Our Reaper informant was quite the filmmaker. We could have spent the rest of the night looking through them, but I didn't think that would have been the best use of our time. I asked Laszlo if there was a way to figure out why the iPad was functioning inside the blind. She must have been waiting for someone to ask her that, because she went at the device like a starving lioness getting her fill of zebra, ripping off the protected cushioning and working off its back cover with the help of some tools from her tool wallet. I know we have multiple elephants in the room right now, I said, but we do have to say something to Tanaka. Do we? Countered Madison. When I gave her a "you've got to be kidding" stare, she let out an exasperated sigh. Yeah, I know. We need all the help we can get. Still, we'd be stupid to. Laszlo's shriek ended our conversation and sent us running to her side. Laszlo had laid bare the iPad's hardware on a nearby desk. Her tools were now scattered around the device as her hands covered her mouth. Her wide-eyed stare stuck on the grey thread-like substance crisscrossing the device's interior. I didn't think I had any more room in my soul for added shock, but those thin filaments found a way to get my skin to crawl once more. As the rest of us absorbed this newest development, Laszlo recovered enough to grab a mini screwdriver and tap it into a filament. There was no reaction. Laszlo did a few more light taps in other spots, but the alien material stayed inert. She frowned and looked at us, putting her hands on her hips and shaking her head. I don't think I'm reverse engineering this, she said. I think we should leave it alone for now. Well, I think we should burn it, said Madison. I think we're in over our heads, said Theo, motioning at Laszlo to hand over the prototype radio she had on her person. I think it's time to call in Tanaka. I didn't share my thoughts at that moment. I was desperately trying to push my dire musings away. Every time I thought I'd gained a working understanding of our enemy, the universe opted to throw more revelations into the mix, showing our enemy to be growing more talented and more powerful. I feared that we'd reach a point where the only rational conclusion was the one I desperately didn't want to believe, that we never really stood a chance. Tanaka didn't waste any time meeting with us. A scant 5 minutes had passed between Theo's brief radio conversation and the moment when Tanaka came through the door accompanied by 5 soldiers, 2 of whom looked like members of his consulting group. Madison tensed up as the soldiers fanned out inside the building. It was possible that Tanaka was merely adding security to our situation. After all, 2 Reapers from 2 different incidents had just shown us the vulnerabilities of our base camp. But the lack of any warm feelings from the good doctor, or any of his people, made me wonder exactly what kind of reception we were in for. Tanaka had a pistol strapped to his waist, a new addition from when I'd last seen him. He also wore a neutral expression, neither outwardly pleased nor angry. He walked up to the desk displaying the altered iPad and stared at it, coolly examined the grey cobweb structure infesting its circuitry. He moved to another desk and leaned against it, looking very tired at that moment. "So, tell me all of it," he said calmly. In the brief window between Theo's call and Tanaka's arrival, my team had discussed our strategy. In the end, we agreed to one course of action. Let Theo do the talking. Theo moved to stand before Tanaka and did just that. "I'll tell you all of it, but you have to do it first." "That is not how it works, Mr. Stockman," countered Tanaka. "You don't get to lecture us about how things work," Theo dared to say, his eyes narrowing. "We're a long way from chains of command and disciplinary hearings. We're all we have, Doctor. My team will fight and die to protect everyone here, but we need to know everything you know." I expected Tanaka to issue a rebuttal or a threat. A lot of leaders resort to such tactics when challenged by their subordinates. Tanaka went silent, looking down at the floor as if contemplating his options, then gave Theo a resigned look that suggested that he was too fatigued or too despondent to put up a power struggle. "I already told you that this base's history is irrelevant," he said. Theo pointed at the room housing the underground opening. "There's a sublevel to this base. I say that's relevant, especially since there's no mention of that in the file you gave us." Tanaka quickly told his bodyguards to wait outside. Like good soldiers, they quickly filed out. He then turned his attention back to us. "Right, what I tell you doesn't leave this room, understand? I will pursue action if it does." "We're wranglers, Tanaka," said Madison. "We know how to keep secrets." Tanaka nodded. It was true, after all. "The file I gave you is accurate, at least until 1979. Theo crossed his arms and smirked. "They reopened the base. Why?" Tanaka made a rueful laugh. "There's another fact that the file doesn't state. Sylvester Colby committed suicide 1 month before the base was due to close. And we're not talking about your normal suicide. He was found in one of the barracks having used a kitchen knife to blind and deafen himself. He was somehow incredibly quiet about it, and subsequently bled out before a medic got to him." I let out a gasp. What would make someone end their life so painfully? "A short investigation was conducted, the results classified and the matter buried," continued Tanaka. "Officially, Colby killed himself over his despondency related to this project's failure." "Unofficially?" Theo asked, and Tanaka shrugged. "I only have so much clout in the military. The brass who keeps this place's secrets told me enough to help me steer our operation away from embarrassing truths. I did manage to get hold of some of Colby's medical records, though. He had been suffering increased anxiety a year before he died, enough so that he started seeing a psychiatrist. One medical report stated that Colby had been talking about the things he couldn't unsee. Colby might have been discredited in public, but his own notes and reports were classified. He also wasn't the only one to feel unnerved by the time spent at the base. There were other medical reports by staff members who felt uneasy, unable to sleep, constantly on edge. "So, what made the government reopen the base and build an underground sublevel 20 years after Colby's death?" asked Madison. "Again, my bosses didn't share much," said Tanaka. "What I could piece together is that it was an effort to follow up on Colby's work. Moreover, the idea of wormholes as a real concept was gaining traction. The sublevel was created to house a new testing chamber for Thin Point experiment. It was hypothesized that the reason Colby didn't succeed in his efforts is because his alleged Thin Point was underground and that direct access was needed. Please don't ask me to explain any of their logic. I think it is all idiocy, made worse by how it all ended." "Did, someone else die?" I asked. 7 someones, Tanaka corrected. Less than a year after the base went back online, there was an accident in the underground testing chamber. Some kind of system malfunction caused 7 lab workers to get trapped in the chamber. They died by suffocation, and after that the base was closed again. All the entrances to the sublevel were sealed. And this is why I chose not to tell you. There was no easy way for the MLs to gain access to the sublevel, and even less reason for them to do so. There are no humans to snack on down there, and MLs are roamers, not hiders. And yet here's an entrance, said Madison, pointing at the hole. And I'm pretty damn sure at least some of them are down there. Your story has a lot of holes in it, Dr. Tanaka, said Theo. Are you sure about any of this? No, I'm not, Tanaka admitted. Certainly not now. But I've told you what I know, certainly more than the brass wanted you to know. And now it's your turn to talk, and I want to know everything. It was my turn to step up, and I didn't hold anything back. Tanaka wasn't going to be someone I sent Christmas cards to, but I did believe he wanted the ML threat ended as much as we did. Tanaka's disclosure of the base's sordid history had convinced me that keeping further secrets was only going to get more people killed. You'd think this would be a lesson we didn't have to learn over and over. After all, if the government had come clean about the MLs decades ago, our situation might not have gotten this bad. But it does seem that the knee-jerk human reaction to the negative is to hide it, suppress it, deny it, and then hope you're dead before the truth comes out. Well, most people are never that lucky. Tanaka took in all my revelations with his usual thoughtful aplomb, though his slight frown suggested that he was not thrilled. He'd taken hold of the subverted iPad during my spiel and had fiddled with it at times, seemingly ignoring our advice about not using it. After I finished, he stared for a time at the grey semi-organic mess on the back of the device before speaking, as if looking for answers within that alien gunk. Laszlo, can you put this device back together? He asked. Laszlo looked at the iPad with something like quiet disgust, and then shrugged. Shouldn't be a problem. No idea how it's functioning in the blind. Hell, it shouldn't even have power. The battery section's choked with the stuff. Understanding it isn't the priority right now, replied Tanaka. This device is our sole link to the one creature willing to work with us, and we need to use it. Theo, I don't have a map of the sublevel, but I do know where the cargo entrance is, and that might be accessible from within. If we can get that open, we can move weapons and our gear inside while we scout it out. Theo frowned as he sussed out Tanaka's intentions. You want my team to go down there and explore further, I take it. Your team obviously knows what it's doing, said Tanaka, even when you're clearly disobeying orders. I'll send Delta Team with you, but that's all I can afford to send right now. I need the rest for the camp. Why not send everyone? Said Madison, looking extremely uncomfortable all of a sudden. Madison was a less is more type when it came to people, so for her to want more people on an operation made me wonder what was really eating at her. Tanaka's answer was to pull out a handful of Polaroid photos from his jacket and hand them to Theo. I was going to tell you all this earlier, but I needed to know what you had encountered first. These pictures were taken by Epsilon Team roughly 30 minutes ago. I had sent them back on the service road so they could get clear of the blind and radio in a report. I was hoping to get some reinforcements, but approximately half a mile from the blind perimeter, they encountered this. They were nice enough to get pictures before they gunned their Humvee all the way back here. Theo handed the photos to me, cursing under his breath as he did so. A quick look at the pictures made me do the same. In the headlights of the Humvee was a horde of MLs, clustering on the road and the surrounding woods. Definitely dozens, probably hundreds. One picture showed them charging the camera holder, so they were clearly aware of us. Something that your Reaper said about little time and us being known and brethren coming, said Tanaka. Now it makes sense. I don't know how honest your Reaper pal is being, but because either it or the other one tipped off the rest. Based on how fast MLs travel, I estimate that this pack could reach us within the hour. We came prepared to fight off a large pack, but we must assume other packs are incoming, not to mention other Reapers. There are no other roads out, and we all know that we can't outrun the MLs on foot. There might be something down in the sublevel, or there may not be. But that sublevel is the best defendable location on this base. We may need it. "May need it," Laszlo blurted out, glumly shaking her head. "With our luck, we're gonna need it." Laszlo wasn't going with us this time, as we all agreed that she had a more valuable role to play. She needed to sift through the video data given to us by the Reaper, ideally to give us an idea of what we were up against. Trekking blindly through abandoned tunnels potentially full of voracious monsters was more my kind of job. I did get the privilege of wearing one of the prototype radios, so there was that. With time at a premium, we geared up and prepared to descend into the vacant sub-level with barely a plan to speak of. We'd start with finding the cargo access room, where there was certain to be a larger door to the service. Getting the door open would require either manual effort or electrical power. We'd cross that bridge when we got to it. The 4 fresh faces that composed Delta Team awaited us at the manhole entrance, none of them volunteering to go first. Madison made to take the plunge, then hesitated at the opening as if a case of cold feet had suddenly hit her. She pulled a flashball and tossed it down, filling the darkness below with steady pulses of cobalt light. A smart move, I thought, but when she didn't proceed downwards, I again considered what else was going on. Theo eventually walked up to her, put a hand on her shoulder in that reassuring way comrades in the know do for their friends, and then made his way down the rungs. I went second, mostly because I wanted to get the moment over with. A basement sub-level was just an oversized survival shelter to me, so you can imagine how little I wanted to go down. But circumstances required me to be brave, and so I climbed down. The world faded to a flashing series of ill-defined images as I reached the bottom, then grew focused again as Theo tossed the active flashball down the tunnel, allowing our flashlights and glow sticks to consistently illuminate the surroundings. We'd entered a downward curving tunnel that felt more like an escape route than the entrance to our science lab. Deactivated lights and tiny vents dotted the walls, but I couldn't make out any side doors or rooms. The chill air did nothing for my nerves, but at least there weren't any easy ambush spots for our foes. Madison finally came down, looking far more clenched up than usual. She walked past me without a word and took point as the Delta Team members climbed down. I really wanted to ask Madison what was going on with her at this point, but it was an understandably bad time for caring and sharing. I still trusted her, but I found myself keeping one eye on her as we proceeded down the tunnel. I blame Hollywood for implanting notions that we'd be running into booby traps or a bottomless chasm or a rush of rabid MLs. But not only was our initial foray trouble-free, we hit a room within the first minute. A metal door stood ajar, its lock and handle bent as if yanked open by something extraordinarily strong. 3 guesses as to what caused that. The dark place before us reminded me of another large warehouse, but this one was far more cluttered than the one above us. The ceiling was now a good 20 feet up, dust motes doing ballet in our light beams. The cruelties of time had led to collapsed shelving and broken crates, creating a wreckage maze that blocked much of the room from easy view. Garbage aside, it was hard not to be impressed with the size of the underground facility. Someone clearly believed in Sylvester Colby's theories enough to throw plenty of resources into building this sub-level. But what had the MLs seen in the place? We followed Madison as she deftly maneuvered us through the maze. As we climbed over the remains of several crates, I noticed the prevalence of ragged claw marks on most of the material. Typical ML behavior was to wreck human furnishings when they could, so there was no doubt now that the MLs had been here. We finally came across the first of our objectives, a cement ramp leading up to a sizable steel door. It had been obscured from our view by an orgy of discarded equipment and packaging, as if the previous staff had been told to seal up the sub-level in the middle of moving out. Despite being peppered with a smattering of shallow claw marks and dents, it seemed reassuringly impenetrable, but now we needed it penetrated. One Delta Team member had an engineering background, so Theo ordered Delta Team to stay at the entrance, see if they could find a way to manually open the door and clear a path for incoming equipment. Our team would finish exploring the room. Or maybe we should hold off on our further exploration until we get the main door open, I suggested to Theo once we were outside of easy earshot from Delta Team. We can't have the rest of the task force come into an unsecured area, Theo replied. Isn't the blind technically an unsecured area? Well, Theo let out an exasperated sigh. What do you want from me, Hector? You want me to be the cautious leader or the gung-ho type? We have to take some chances. Yes, some chances, but this place is too big for the three of us to search effectively. I felt my caution was warranted. I still couldn't make out the rest of the shadowed room through the labyrinth of shelving and storage. I couldn't even tell if there was another exit. Right, we'll start with securing the route between here and the tunnel to Colby Hall. We'll set up an easy path to follow. Sound safe enough to you? I couldn't help noticing Theo's acerbic tone. I figured he was less worried about us and more concerned with leaving Laszlo behind, under the protection of Dr. Tanaka's untested leadership. Since there wasn't much either of us could do about it, I let my mind wander to a distracting question. So, what is that tunnel to Colby Hall anyway? I asked, more or less rhetorically. Some kind of fire exit? Probably, said Theo. Smart people don't typically build sublevels with only one entrance. Yeah, but why does it lead into a building and not outside? Containment? Secrecy? Theo glared at me. I was supposed to guess at the mindset of a bunch of freaky scientists from decades ago. Suddenly regretting this line of thinking, I also finally realized Madison hadn't joined in the conversation. Instead, she was anxiously staring at the steel door with the kind of look that a psychic made to will a door open. I was now concerned enough about her atypical consternation that I asked Theo for a quick aside before we kept going. We found a spot further away from her, and I quietly asked if he'd noticed Madison's behavior. This is Madison, Hector, he stated. She's got more steel than blood in her. She'll be all right. Well, she's distracted, Theo, I countered. We've been surrounded by dozens of man-eating monsters on 2 separate occasions, and I've never seen her as disturbed as I see her right now. What do you know? I could see the indecision in his eyes. He clearly knew something about Madison, but then he shook his head, denying an explanation. It's my job to know her history, Hector, but it's not my place to tell you, not unless it becomes an issue. Let's just focus on... But I missed the rest of his statement as Laszlo's voice cut in, making me jump. Tanaka's asking for a sit-rep, Hector, she said, and I have news of my own. I gave her a quick update, and she did the same. Hers was more interesting. We found the external cargo entrance into the sublevel. Some clever dick thought to build a tool shed over it and call it a day. Tanaka thinks he can demolish the shed and get the door partially clear within 2 hours. Then we can rig a generator to open the door from the outside. We're also fortifying the building I'm in, just in case we have to defend it while the task force evacuates underground. Oh, and if you hear a big boom, that's just the shed exploding. Tanaka brought dynamite. He brought dynamite? I replied. Seems a little Looney Tunes, right? She said. But it makes sense. We can't exactly trust remote detonators. But don't worry, it's military dynamite, meaning it's free of nitroglycerin. More stable that way. I wasn't reassured, but I did hold my tongue. I signed off and rubbed the back of my sore neck as I relayed Laszlo's information to Theo. Well, my stress was understandable, but it also felt like the constant drone in my head was intensifying. Theo's grimace suggested he was back to his unease over Laszlo, and I couldn't resist an attempt at reassurance. Laszlo's safe right now, I said. Safer than we are, probably. He gave me a questioning look. Oh, don't give me Hallmark cliches, Hector. Let's just get back to... He then looked around in confusion. Madison. I searched the immediate area. Delta Team was still dealing with the door, but Madison had disappeared on us. Oh, shit, Theo muttered. Not the time, Mads. After a few minutes of searching, Theo found a path in the crate maze opposite our position and concluded that Madison had most likely used it. While not a smart move to spread ourselves out further, We needed to find Madison before her recklessness got her killed. The two of us hurried through the gap and into the rest of the debris maze, sacrificing caution for speed. I called out her name once, my words reverberating creepily through the dark facility. Then Theo hushed me, reminding me that we were in enemy territory and shouldn't be announcing our presence if possible. Our pursuit came to an end when the maze abruptly gave way to a cleared section near the far side of the chamber. My carbine rose to the ready as I took in the ominous scene before me. Much effort had been spent by parties unknown to pile up debris against the nearby walls, creating a clearing devoted to a brand new form of Meat Locust machination. The space contained dozens of small figures frozen in positions of submission around piles of broken, calcified material. We stepped around stone-like figures of MLs in various states of disrepair, their hardened bodies surrounded by growing piles of dust, as bits of them broke off and dissolved. This was a Reaper birthing site, a massive one, and I counted at least 9 separate birthing rituals. If I'd been a more naive scientific type, I might have thought this was a gold mine. ML tissue, live or dead, was virtually impossible to come by, but these ML corpses had become something more mineral than biological, and little had been learned through the study of the samples Team Abbott had acquired all those months ago. Our enemy's biology worked on a different level, a level beyond our understanding, and this orgy of ML debris only served to taunt our ignorance. One figure in the mess proved human. Madison stood in the middle of the clearing, ignoring me and Theo as we called her name and approached. Her rifle-mounted flashlight aimed toward the wall to our right, the beam projecting into another tunnel leading out of the chamber. This tunnel was far larger than the previous one, able to fit motor vehicles if needed. I noticed a metal rail track built into the floor, the starting point only a few feet away from my position, the rest of it disappearing into the tunnel's gloom. I wagered it was a cargo tunnel, used for shuttling equipment from this room to the actual laboratories. I walked up to Madison cautiously, scanning her for distress or injury. She looked physically okay, no signs of blood, but she was acting like an army of locusts were about to come charging out of the cargo tunnel. Well, for all I knew, she might be right. "Madison, why didn't you wait for us?" I asked. "Oh, I can't think in here," she said softly, her eyes remaining focused on the tunnel. "I needed to get on with it." "Yeah, do I need to send you topside?" said Theo. "You know you can't go hunting on your own." "Don't bench me now, Theo," she said. "Hey, you're not okay, Madison," I replied gently. "Look at your feet, Hector," she calmly stated. "Look at the floor all around you." I didn't think Madison was in a rational frame of mind at the moment, yet I couldn't help but do as she asked. My flashlight touched on the concrete floor below me, showing up a thin level of dirt coating it. Not dirt, though. No, it was the same color and consistency of the ML corpse dust, and some of it was in thick chunks that crunched underfoot, like dried mud that flaked off the treads of boots. There was quite a lot of it. Some spots were 2 or 3 inches deep in places. I expanded my search and realized that the 3 of us were standing in the center of a huge, circular pile of detritus. "Something else was made here," Madison explained in a haunted tone. "Now follow my light." She pointed a beam at a spot on the edge of the substance circle. Inhuman footprints could be seen on the concrete heading away, a torrent of them. On the edges, the prints were the familiar 3-toed form of an ML. A few were larger than the others, suggesting that Reapers were among their number. But the center of the stampede was a chaotic mishmash of shapes, some like twisted handprints, others like that of a floppy appendage dragging on the ground. Some large and malformed entity had half-walked, half-dragged itself through the dust pile, leaving behind a thick trail that faded into the cargo tunnel. Judging from the width of the trail, it was around 15 feet wide. A creeping dread found me and dug in, and the word Lord came to mind, and I considered the possibility that the newest creation was that very thing. I found myself staring into the tunnel, wishing I had a ton of dynamite right then. I'd have sealed the cargo tunnel entrance and lived out the rest of my time on the planet ignorant of the full horror that we were fighting. Thank God for Theo, though. He interrupted my escalating terror by throwing out the observation that these tracks looked several days old. For whatever reason, he had his mind firmly on working the problem, not understanding its implications. Madison seemed to respond to his words by taking her eyes off the tunnel and looking around the scene. She then agreed. All this had occurred at least a week ago. Well, that snapped me out of my panic because our Reaper ally had said the Lord was something still to come. Whatever had been born here wasn't the Locust Endgame, at least not yet. Stuck in a dark, unexplored facility, with a pack of MLs hiding about, a horde of MLs approaching, no rescue coming, and still no answers to my growing list of questions, I took what little hope I could. Sometimes a little hope is all you need to keep moving. Part 2. We decided to follow my advice and hold position within the cargo chamber until we could muster our task force. To that end, we spent the next hour shifting enough crates and rubble to give us a direct path from the steel door entrance to the cargo tunnel. 2 men from Delta Team were now stationed at the cargo tunnel entrance. They would alert us with active flashballs if anything larger than a rat showed up. On the good news front, our engineer found an access panel that would allow us to power up the door using a portable generator. And to that end, Laszlo and the other topsiders came up with a rope harness designed to ferry supplies down the manhole entrance, including a small generator that we hoped would do the trick. Tanaka also deigned to spare us 3 more soldiers for the operation, helping to clear enough room for our incoming supplies once we opened the main door. Theo ordered Madison to take a breather, and so she found a crate to perch on while keeping an eye on the cargo tunnel, holding a rifle in her lap and looking dejected the whole time. I managed to find a moment between carting around heavy objects to ask her if she needed anything. She shook her head and kept her distant vigil. Well, I normally knew better than to push her too hard, but we no longer had the luxury of affording mental breakdowns. I wasn't all that far from one myself, and I was far from alone. I caught offhand comments from the other soldiers, describing the gnawing irritation from the buzzing, like it was a weight growing heavier and heavier on their minds. I wanted to rely on Madison, but I needed to know if I could. "Hey, is this, claustrophobia?" I boldly asked. "It's okay if it is, you know. There's no shame." "Shame?" She didn't even look at me, but her dark tone told me plenty of her mood. "You think being afraid of tight places is enough to give me shame?" "I have no clue, Madison," I said calmly. "But I would like to know. Remember when you told me not to be a hero on things like this?" Madison looked at me finally, made an odd grunting sound, and then looked back at the ground. "You know what bloodshed does to you, Hector? Scars you, always does. Even if you never receive a knife wound or a bullet hole, you come away from it wounded. Parts of you just don't ever work the same again. But sometimes you're not sure which parts. If you lose a hand, it's obvious, but if you lose your soul..." I sat down next to her as I waited for her to continue. She closed her eyes for a time, like a diver mustering up the courage to jump off a cliff. When her eyes opened, they were different than before, distant and haunted. "I had a tour duty in Iraq 15 years ago, back when the country thought we could cure all our terrorist ills with perpetual warfare in distant lands. My squad was in charge of investigating possible sites for chemical weapons. We had a pretty impressive score of 0 out of 43 operations. On Operation 44, one of our informants had told us about an underground bunker out in the desert that Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard had supposedly frequented on a regular basis. Reynolds, my squad leader, was tired of constant failure, thought it was time to think outside the box. So the 9 of us went there without waiting for proper backup, hoping to catch some Saddam loyalists being naughty. The bunker only had one entrance in and out, not big enough for transport vehicles to use. I already suspected that this was going to be another bust, but Reynolds has us go in anyway. Suppose if I'd been in charge, I'd have done the same thing. I smelled it before I saw it. It's what happens when you enter a tomb. You smell the rot before you see the bodies. There's a series of storage rooms that were being used to store several corpses, maybe 2 or 3 per room. Most likely they were political prisoners from Saddam's reign, or reprisal killings from Saddam's loyalists. We already had enough reason to leave and get help, but Reynolds didn't care about dead civvies as much as finding WMDs. One doesn't get promotions if one doesn't impress the brass. So we pushed in further, eventually coming to a room not unlike this one. Madison closed her eyes again, no doubt to prepare herself for the next leg of her memory. I was on point, maybe 30 feet ahead of the squad. I saw I was all by myself when I heard voices ahead, speaking Arabic. I had a group of 4 men berating a family of 5 at gunpoint. A man, 1 woman, 3 children. I took cover and listened. I only understood a smattering of Arabic, enough to gather that the gunmen were calling the family disloyal, while the family pleaded that they had their own people. I could see where this was going, so I radioed Reynolds and asked him for orders. He took his sweet time getting back to me, then only to ask if I could see any chemical weapons. When I said no, he told me to get back to the squad. We were leaving. She slowly shook her head as a tear slid from the corner of one eye. I joined the military because I thought I could do some good. I wanted to save the innocent, and I didn't care if the innocent were American or Iraqi. Reynolds, on the other hand, didn't want to take the risks unless it made him look good. We were already out on a limb authority-wise. If there had been WMDs, he figured we'd be forgiven for not following procedure. But that family was just another poor Iraqi family. They weren't enough to risk his command or our lives, so, well, the squad left and I followed. She then made a rueful laugh. Back then, I wasn't the suicidally brave person you know now. I was a good little soldier, still trying to prove I belonged in the military. Reynolds somehow called it in without implicating us. When I read the report later, there were 5 more corpses than I'd previously counted. Before I could reply, she held up a silencing finger. I don't want to hear it wasn't my fault. I could have argued harder. Could have forced us into a confrontation. Maybe I would have been dishonorably discharged. Maybe I would have gotten myself or other members of my squad killed. Maybe the family would have died anywhere. It's all a bunch of what-ifs. All I know is that I did nothing. And those people, those children. She laughed again. So, now you know my big motivation, guilt. This place we're in, God, it wears on me. I feel like I've gone back 15 years and that I'm about to find something truly horrible again, and I won't be able to stop it. Only this time the casualty rate is going to be a lot higher than a single family. Look, it's not 15 years ago, Madison, I finally said. We can't stop it this time. She gave me one of her patented, don't kid me stares. We still don't know what it is. I'm sure Laszlo has her ideas, but I'm afraid to ask her. She tends to be right. You don't know any more than the rest of us. True, I replied. But I can't help but try to be Mr. Positive, while you can't help being the kick-ass wrangler you've always been. Madison laughed. I guess we're both helpless in our own way. I do appreciate your... Well, I would have liked to have heard Madison's compliment, considering how infrequently she gave them, but Laszlo's frantic voice over the radio drowned it out. I had to ask her to repeat herself, but instead she informed me that this wasn't something she could convey over the radio. She needed me back at the manhole. Madison told me to go to meet Laszlo, her gaze back to its steely focus once more. I'm where I need to be, Hector. You and Laszlo go figure out what we're up against, and then point me at it. When I arrived back at the manhole entrance, I was surprised to see Laszlo down in the tunnel. She was flanked by a few bags of supplies and a pair of standing electric lanterns which kept the scene shadow-free, but otherwise she was alone. She leaned against a wall with a Reaper iPad in hand, now half wrapped in some kind of aluminum foil. She didn't smile when she saw me, too agitated to give me her full attention. "Oh, don't mind the wrapping," she explained as she beckoned me inside. "I wanted extra protection between me and the stuff inside the device, in case it, I don't know, tries to get touchy-feely or something. Hey, I have videos for you to see." "Shouldn't you be showing them to Tanaka?" I asked. "Shouldn't you be, above ground?" "Well, firstly, I don't trust him 100%. Secondly, I work better without people watching me. Thirdly, it's safer to be down here right now." She swiped her fingers along the smooth surface of the iPad as she talked, looking for the proper file. 10 minutes ago, one of the sentries spotted a pack just outside the base to the south. Another pack is maybe 5 miles out to the west. But the cargo door is clear on our end, so we just need the damn door open." She found her desired video and started it up without further comment. The video began in total darkness at first, then gathered an eerie purple luminance that depicted the scene well enough for me to see the proceedings. From the angle of the video, the surface operator appeared to be filming from atop a section of shelving inside the cargo room our team currently occupied. A large pack of MLs were in motion, the violet glow emitting from several of their members. Yet another new trick to the MLs, though it failed to impress me. Other creatures danced about their glowing brethren as if celebrating the occasion. Soon the luminous ones formed a circle, kneeling down to adopt the kowtow pose common to their Reaper birthing rituals. I realized this was one of those rituals in action. Our Reaper ally had been diligent enough to make a recording. As the video continued, the skin of the participating creatures began to change texture, shifting color to a bluer hue as a grimy substance formed under their bodies. The substance took on a life of its own, flowing and merging into the center of the ritual circle. The video ended just as the center mass began to grow, taking on an egg-like nature, while other MLs frolicked like children experiencing a sugar rush. Laszlo immediately started a new video. As the scene opened, artificial light streamed in off an off-scene source. We'd skipped the incubation phase of the ritual and were now witnessing a fully grown Reaper breaking out of its egg. It punched and thrashed its way free, the newborn Reaper soon standing amidst a throng of servile minions who proceeded to wipe the excess calcified material from all 6 of its limbs. This one had darker skin than our Reaper ally, but otherwise seemed remarkably similar in physicality. It started to walk about the gathering like a general inspecting its army, knocking aside any ML that didn't get out of its way fast enough. A second hatching was occurring in the background, and by the time the camera creature focused on it, the next infant Reaper was already standing and snarling. But this one wasn't like the previous Reaper. I recognized the deformed extra arm, making it clear this one was the Reaper we'd fought and killed. The normal Reaper came up to it as the malformed Reaper looked about with confusion. I made out a scowl on the normal Reaper's face. A third Reaper then appeared from off-screen, and the 2 normal types began to shove the malformed one around. The MLs didn't seem to know what to do other than steer clear of the escalating altercation. The shoving match began a brawl as the malformed Reaper lost its temper and lashed out at its siblings. It could do little more against the measured movements of its siblings though, and its wild attacks were slowing as the other Reapers stared it down. I suspected they were using their mental abilities to subdue it, and as the video ended, it finally bowed its head to the others, submitting itself as if it was just an overgrown meat locust. So our dead Reaper really was a factory reject, I commented. They must have sent it out to find and kill our turncoat Reaper. Laszlo didn't respond to my observation, other than to swipe her finger once more and summon a new video. This video started much like the first one, a gathering of MLs about to begin a new birthing ritual. Well, this time there were far more than 10 MLs participating. I counted maybe 25 locusts rushing together, forming a pile of writhing, screaming bodies that poked and bit at each other with insane frenzy. I thought at first they were trying to kill each other, but then their bodies began to adopt the purplish glow apropos to the birthing ritual. The pile lit up like a macabre Christmas tree, and much to my dawning horror, I saw hands begin to merge with other hands, faces melting into the flesh of other bodies. Some of the creatures lost their shape, twisting, lengthening, flattening, and mutating in all manner of grotesque permutations. I almost told Laszlo to turn off the video, not wanting to see this to its conclusion. But as the process continued, the footage began to grow distorted, hiding most of what transpired beneath static and distortion. Seconds later, the footage went to black and never recovered. "I'd say that was your mystery creation being born," said Laszlo. "Must be putting out so much Reaper radiation that even this modified iPad couldn't deal with it." "Oh, the blending," I muttered. I wasn't trying to be cryptic. The words just slipped out as I processed this newest development. "You think this is what our Reaper ally meant?" asked Laszlo, her gaze quizzical. "Well, maybe. That process the MLs were undergoing sure seemed to live up to the word. Didn't see any Reapers in that mass, though. Maybe it's just the beginning process, the foundation. Maybe Reapers got added to the mix later. These Reapers seem to be not just intelligent, but rational. Perhaps our turncoat Reaper is afraid of being absorbed and losing itself." I mulled this over silently. Self-preservation was a relatable motivation. Well, none of this explains what they're up to, though. Laszlo looked away from me, doing that pose she did when she had an idea that she wanted to share, but didn't think the response would be receptive. "Hey, Laz, if you have any wild theories, I'll take what I can get." She still seemed torn on sharing them. I added that I wouldn't tell anyone else if she didn't wish it. "I'm not worried about ridicule, Hector," she confessed. "I'm worried about the implications. Mainly, I think the MLs are trying to use the thin point inside this base." "Okay, that's a plenty wild theory," I replied, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. "Reasoning?" "Well, let me make it clear that I don't think the MLs originated from this area. The base was decommissioned in 1959. The first ML showed up in 1958 and nowhere near this place. But I think something happened in 1979. The military doesn't shut down bases over accidental deaths. I think they were messing with a thin point, and it messed back at them in a bad way. We also know that Reaper radiation has a massive range. It exists at a wavelength or dimension beyond what we currently understand. Could be that this place, the thin spot in particular, is sending out its own energy signature, acting like a beacon of sorts. Well, we've been assuming the MLs were behind the blind's radiation. What if the thin point is the source? Remember how Tanaka told us that the psychological strain Colby had been under, well, how other staff felt uncomfortable themselves? Perhaps some people were sensitive to the thin point's energy in the past, back when it was weaker. But I think the MLs are enhancing it now to the point where it's strong enough for all of us to feel it. At that point, I agreed with Laszlo about one thing. I didn't like the implications. "Well, I suppose this is where you tell me the MLs are trying to open a wormhole to their home world," I said. "Well, maybe," she said, shrugging emphatically. "Maybe they're using it to send an intergalactic signal. Maybe they're using it to cause a spatial disruption that'll tear the world apart. Your guess is as good as mine. But they obviously care about it enough to send an army against us. The last count on those packs surrounding the base stood at over 630. And yet we've had zero activity down here," I countered. "If this place is so important, why are the MLs already inside the base attacking?" "Well, I don't think they can," she replied. "I think the ones we saw in the videos used up most of their number creating Reapers and whatever constructs they need to, well, do whatever they plan to do. I think the leftovers were with that feral Reaper, which we took out. We might be able to stroll right up to their underground lair and knock. Or, they may be planning an ambush." Laszlo sighed heavily. "Yeah, that too. And before you ask me, no, I don't have any idea what this Lord thing is. Probably the big cheese of the whole ML army. Well, for all I know, they're going to make it like they made the Reapers. Or they're bringing it here from somewhere else." Well, I hadn't wanted to ask her. Every time I thought of the name, I felt twinges of panic invade my calm. I didn't know why. We knew nothing about this nebulous being, yet I couldn't shake my discomfort at even mentioning it. Like a child worried that mentioning the bogeyman's name would cause it to come out from under the bed. Laszlo's face then switched to a goofy smirk. "You remind me, do military leaders have the power to conduct marriage ceremonies? Mom always wanted me to get married while she was still alive. Think Theo will go for it?" Well, I honestly couldn't tell if she was serious, and I stammered briefly until her smirk turned into a smile. Had you go in there for a second, didn't I? I laughed. I needed to, all things considered. I wasn't at all sure you were the marrying type. Well, maybe I am, but long-term plans must be on hold, don't you think? What's the world going to look like in a couple of years? Normal is dead and new normal is gasping for air. She had to end her thought there as an incoming transmission drew her attention. Before coming to meet Laszlo, I'd given my radio to Theo, so I was no longer privy to radio chatter. But Laszlo was nice enough to convey the good news. The engineering team had successfully wired up the generator and the door was starting to roll open. The good news only lasted a few seconds as Laszlo's smile switched to a frown. The door was jamming at the halfway mark. Apparently you couldn't entirely rely on decades-old mechanical gears to stay in perfect working order. People and portable equipment could still be moved in, but not our vehicles. Our heaviest artillery would have to be abandoned. The next bit of bad news came in the form of distant weapons fire. I could trace it to the surface, the quantity and volume escalating as I listened. Laszlo and I exchanged fearful stares. The MLs had to be starting their assault. I wanted to tell Laszlo to go join Theo, to stay down here and be safe, but she was already climbing up the manhole rungs before I could speak. I followed her up instead. The first thing I noticed upon clearing the manhole was the ring of dynamite charges bordering the underground opening, their fuses wired into a bundle for easy lighting. Tanaka's people had been busy in the few hours since I'd been topside. There were a number of boxes and duffel bags in the room, full of foodstuffs, medical supplies, and various survival gear. 3 other soldiers were present, taking positions at windows with their guns at the ready, barely even noticing our arrival. A sliver of sunshine graced the morning outside, the cloud cover that had followed us to the blind having moved off to the north. It was shaping up to be a sunny day, and I lamented that I wouldn't be seeing it. I could hear gunfire erupting from all over the base, punctuated by sharp explosions, screaming monsters, and the occasional scream of a human meeting a terrible fate. "Help me get what gear we can down the hole," Laszlo said, moving to gather a massive duffel bag. "We're under full assault. Tanaka is sending a demo team to this spot, but if they don't show, well, you know how to work a butane lighter." We worked as fast as we could, tossing down the more durable gear and lowering what wouldn't survive a short fall. But we only got to half the supplies before 2 soldiers ran through the main door, one wearing a copious amount of red over his blue garments. They frantically moved a pair of desks in front of the door, all the while arguing with each other over whose fault it was that their compatriots hadn't made it. I stopped moving supplies and asked the soldier, not covered in blood, about the situation. In between gasping breaths, he stated that the damn monsters were overrunning everything. The surviving task force members were heading for the main underground entrance. Anyone who couldn't make it there was supposed to come here. He'd been part of a 6-person squad tasked to protect the south side of the base. They had watched a wave of the beasts approach their position, taking their time as if knowing their prey couldn't go anywhere. When the wave passed the established contact line, the squad had opened fire. They had to have killed dozens, but it was like firing into a hurricane. The order to retreat went out and the squad had to run for it, but the other 4 soldiers had gotten cut off. He might have continued with his sad story had Laszlo not calmly reminded us that the MLs were heading this way. She then started handing out orders to the other soldiers, telling them what gear to save and what to leave behind. Theo must have rubbed off on her because no one questioned her authority as we worked to salvage what we could while holding out for any more survivors. No one reasonably expected anyone else to arrive at our doorstep. Certainly nothing human. But we waited just the same. The first sign that it was time to head underground was when an ML launched itself at one of our windows. The creature smashed into it, but failed to break through it, clinging to the frame as it repeatedly bashed its head against the creaking glass. The soldier nearest the window opened fire, deafening the rest of us, as the creature fell from the window with 2 holes in its face. Other windows registered impacts, forcing us to abandon the rest of the supplies as we played whack-a-mole with the creatures, our guns knocking them down as they appeared. Laszlo and I changed tactics and started tossing flashballs out of the windows, lighting everything up with an azure glare. The ML assault lightened up enough for me to shout above the bedlam, demanding we exit, and no one argued. Laszlo went first at my insistence. She tossed the bundle of fuses down the hole just before she climbed down herself. 3 soldiers went before me. The last 2, the sole survivors of their ill-fated squad, told me to go ahead of them. I could see in their eyes they weren't in the mood for an argument, and so I obliged them. They stationed themselves at the hole, filling the air with bullets as I descended. I hoped they weren't choosing to make a last stand. We grabbed what gear we could manage as Laszlo brought out her butane lighter. Yelling a 30-second warning to the 2 soldiers still above us, she lit the fuses. As a group, we moved as fast as our encumbered bodies could manage down the tunnel, the echoes of battle at first fading in our wake, and then growing louder again as we grew closer to the cargo area. We didn't make it all the way before a frantic voice called out from the tunnel behind us. I dropped my gear and turned to see the bloodied soldier running to catch up, warning us that the horde was right behind him. I hadn't been counting down the seconds before the explosion, but it had to be close to detonation. Stopping was probably a bad idea, but I could make out several MLs loping after the man, and my heroic sensibilities kicked in. I dropped to one knee, raised my carbine, and picked off the pursuing creatures as they came. It proved surprisingly easy, what with the narrow corridor and the single-minded pursuit of the creatures. Then the world turned to smoke and pain as the blast wave surged down the tunnel, enveloping us with a choking dust cloud, my ears ringing painfully as I ducked down to avoid the worst of the effects. Stunned, blind, and deaf, I was easy prey for a surviving locust. But as the dust abated and my senses cleared, my fears proved groundless. The only locusts present were disintegrating on the ground. The soldier I'd tried to save lay among them, still as a corpse. Until he moaned and started to stir. Laszlo came to me as the rest of the group went to the injured survivor. She gave me a half smile and helped me to my feet. "You really can't stop yourself, can you?" "Well, saving people, you mean?" I replied. "It's probably a fatal condition." Her smile faded, as did her humorous tone. "Well, I hope not. Some of us might miss you when you're gone." Well, I smiled at that. Truth be told, before I'd met Madison and Theo and Laszlo, before my life had plunged into a darker trajectory, I didn't really have anyone else in my life. My parents had died in a car accident a decade ago, and I have no siblings. The rest of my relatives were distant for various reasons. Well, my friendships had been few and my partners fewer. I envied those people who could maintain their connections to others. Mine always seemed to drift away, no matter what I tried. Or perhaps that's why I'd put up with an unreliable girlfriend like Arissa for so long, and why I'd tried to save her all those months ago. Yet here, under the earth, with death closing in from all sides, I'd found a family of sorts. But death hadn't stopped its advance. The sounds of battle beckoned our group to limp onward, even though I doubted we could add much to the fight in our current condition. If Madison and Theo couldn't hold the sub-level, the rest of us didn't stand a chance. Part 3. I was glad we'd taken the time to clear an adequate path through the debris maze, because the minute it took to reach the rest of the task force felt like 1 minute too long. I feared we'd be alive just in time to see a flood of inhuman death pouring into the cargo room as it tore apart our friends. But the flood proved a mere trickle. the MLs dying as quickly as they came on. The large metal door groaned in protest as it slowly slid closed, bottlenecking the incoming creatures into a narrow kill zone. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath until the door closed and my lungs insisted on new air. Madison and Theo were okay, both having killed their fair share of MLs. Theo found Laszlo almost immediately and gave her a panicky hug, clearly fearing for her safety. Madison seemed more alive now, as if the familiar act of dealing out death had suppressed her earlier disquiet. So, at least for my team, the reunion was a happy one. My calm only lasted until I took in the situation and realized the damage wrought on our task force. A ghastly pile of locust corpses littered the floor around the main door, and I counted 2 other corpses that had once been human. Several soldiers had suffered significant injury, one of whom lay on the cold cement as 2 other people tried to control the bleeding from a dozen wounds. Dr. Tanaka sat on a wooden crate, his face wearing the haunted look that people got when they'd just been pushed beyond their limits. His hand was heavily bandaged, as well as looking smaller than normal. A quick head count put us at 18 people, including my team. Tanaka's consulting group had been reduced to 3. Less than half our total task force had made it to the sub-level alive. As we recovered from the shock of the attack and took further stock of the situation, the news only got worse. Tanaka's crew had only managed to bring in a small percentage of our total gear before the MLs attacked. Ammo was in short supply. The shielded radio system and one other generator had been saved, so we did have some communication. Funnily enough, the mechanical harness I'd seen before, which I now knew to be a powered exoskeleton supplied by DARPA, had made it inside. One of Tanako's fellow consultants had been wearing it to carry supplies into the sub-level. With Tanaka in no shape to take command, Theo went ahead and organized our defenses, putting soldiers at all 3 egress points out of the room. He ordered the remaining troops to take inventory and create a new base camp while our team and Tanaka discussed our options. Tanaka let himself be guided through the room until we found a quiet corner. By then, Tanaka seemed to recover enough to be communicative, though he kept cradling his injured left hand and looking out toward the main entrance as if afraid it would be open again. Theo then asked Tanaka what had happened. In a cool, emotionless voice, Dr. Tanaka gave us the gory details. He'd pulled back his patrols and positioned his squads around the base for optimal defense. 2 Humvees had been placed near the main sub-level entrance. The other 2 Humvees and the APC had been used to bolster the defense squads. Claymore mines and simple snares had been set. Every blue-colored lantern and spotlight had been deployed. Tanaka and his fellow consultants were in the process of ferrying supplies into the sub-level when the attack had come. The soldiers committed themselves with bravery and honor, but bravery can only hold out so long against the sheer power of numbers. It had taken less than 4 minutes to go through all our flashballs, explosives, and most of our ammo. Hundreds of locusts had to have died in the assault, and yet they came on. "I've read all the reports, you know," Tanaka mused, his tone distant. "I know how single-minded the MLs can be, but I don't think you can really prepare for it. They're like ants in a way, willing to throw almost everything at their enemies so long as they don't throw absolutely everything. It is total war. Humans don't do total war very well. We worry too much about dying." Tanaka dropped his digression and returned to his debriefing. Realizing that his defenses wouldn't hold out much longer, Tanaka ordered the task force to retreat to the sub-level. Most obeyed, but a few of the vehicle gunners stayed at their positions to offer the rest a chance to escape. It was possible that those gunners might still be alive if they buttoned up their vehicles in time, but they'd be trapped just the same, stuck in cramped quarters with little in the way of supplies and an army of human eaters constantly trying to get inside. The final leg of the retreat was the worst, as the task force rushed the half-open entrance at the same time that Tanaka's people were still trying to get supplies inside. The ensuing logjam undoubtedly cost a few people their lives, and cost Tanaka a finger from his left hand. The rest we already knew. "So, what do you think, Team Abbott?" he said, regarding us with a dark look. "Half our force is gone. Our air is questionable. Our combined battery power will last less than 2 days. Our food and water might get us through a week, and we have no other way out of this sub-level." Well, we, don't know that, I pointed out in a knee-jerk fashion. The entrance into Colby Hall is buried under a ton of rubble, Tanaka pointed out. I doubt the architects behind this base thought a third entrance was needed. They didn't design this sublevel with withstanding a siege in mind. It also won't hold forever, said Madison. The MLs can't get through the front door, but they can move rubble. They won't get tired and they won't give up. Give it a couple of days and they'll dig in here soon enough. So again, Team Abbott, what do you think? Asked Tanaka, his voice growing more tired as he spoke. Find the test chamber and stop the MLs, said Theo. Seemed obvious, really. Damn right, said Madison. What else can we do? Sit and wait, said Tanaka coolly. His tone suggested he was deadly serious. If you haven't noticed lately, heroics are getting us killed. Right now there's only one way into this room where the MLs can come at us easily, and we don't even know if there are any down here with us. We fortify that entrance, and we can survive until reinforcements get here. Yeah, but you told us they weren't coming, I said. Your people never got clear of the blind. True, but we have an overdue limit in place, he clarified. You're familiar with that term, correct? I was, though it didn't come up much. If a Wrangler team went a certain number of hours without communicating a sitrep to headquarters, we'd be declared overdue. Another team would then be sent in to find us, typically a larger one with more resources. Team Abbott had never triggered an overdue limit. Most teams hadn't, since triggering one meant one of two possibilities. Either your entire team was grossly incompetent, or your entire team was dead. We are 11 hours over our limit, Tanaka continued. They should be sending reinforcements our way as we speak, certainly within 48 hours. If we don't weaken our position further, we might live long enough to see them. But this isn't about us, said Laszlo. We may not have 48 hours. The world might not have 48 hours. You do not have any direct evidence of that, said Tanaka. I won't order anyone to go further without actual proof. Well, don't order us then, said Madison. We'll volunteer. Madison gave the rest of the team the look that said, You're backing me up here, right? I nodded, as did Theo and Laszlo. Look, I know how you're feeling right now, Doctor, said Theo. You prepared as best you could, and shit went sideways. Makes you question everything you did and everything you're gonna do. But you knew something bad was gonna go on in this region. Your gut told you that, despite the lack of evidence. You've seen what the MLs are throwing at us here. We even have a rogue Reaper telling us that we must act before it's too late. You can't hold the line here, but please let us do our job. Considering the sorry state Tanaka was in, I doubt the consultant could have put up much resistance if Theo decided our team would forge ahead regardless of Tanaka's decision. But I understood Theo's desire for cooperation. We'd only survive this if we could avoid further division, and so I was relieved when Tanaka gave us his blessing. Walking further into the lion's den was not my idea of a good time, but it beat waiting for the monsters to come to us. One more thing, said Madison, clearly sensing an opening. We'll, need your best toys. It was too bad that there were too few toys left for us to pick over, but we did procure one nifty piece of gear, the powered exoskeleton. Well, it wasn't much to look at, mostly a set of metal braces connected to actuators and a large battery pack. Most sci-fi movie fans would scoff at its unsexy design, but it did allow us to carry an M249 light machine gun. Combined with a special swivel mount, it turned the exoskeleton into a mobile machine gun nest. And best of all, we had 200 rounds of armor-piercing goodness at our disposal. It was our best bet against any Reapers we might encounter. On the negative side, its reaction time was limited, as was its maneuverability, and its battery life was down to slightly over 2 hours, with no replacements available. Theo insisted that he use the exoskeleton, touting his size and combat experience. I expected Madison to argue, but she took one look at the exoskeleton, wrinkled her nose, and said, No thanks. I noticed Laszlo rummaging around the camp, but didn't think to ask her what she was after. I was too distracted by the mood of the other troops, the tangible feeling of shock they exuded as they tried to go about their duties. I saw one man sobbing over the covered body of the man the medics had tried to save. 2 female soldiers almost came to blows over who got the camp's last remaining fruit cup. Another soldier kept loading and unloading his pistol while staring off into space. At one point I thought it foolish for Team Abbott to head off on our own, considering we still had a bunch of soldiers capable of fighting. But my observation showed me that they weren't ready to continue. They'd faced the enemy head-on and had felt their ravenous intensity, their utter disregard for life. It would take time to come to grips with that kind of savagery. A small team of hardened wranglers could fare better than a large group of rattled warriors. Then came the moment when Theo attempted to convince Laszlo to stay behind. I knew he'd try it, just as I knew she wouldn't listen. She gave him a hearty earful, ranging from the fact that she was the best qualified to keep his exoskeleton running, to the insulting insinuation that she couldn't handle herself after all this time. She wasn't letting us go without her. I expected Theo to get angry and try to get her restrained or something dramatic like that. But he surrendered the point with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen on him. Laszlo broke protocol by giving him a full kiss on the lips and said it would be okay, that he hadn't yet met an ML that could beat us. I think Theo simply realized that there was no sanctuary for her now, no way to distance her from what was coming. Then he glanced my way, and in his eyes I knew he was not so gently reminding me of my promise to protect Laszlo. I nodded to him, not because I was certain I could fulfill it, but because even the bravest of us need to believe in things that may not come true. We could only afford an hour of rest, and I failed to get any. I fixated on an old Wrangler tradition, the one where you leave behind a letter or statement for your next of kin to receive when you went to battle, in case you didn't return. Laszlo and Theo had stacks of letters stashed in P.O. boxes, all of which would be released to their parents and siblings upon their deaths. Madison had one letter that she kept in her cabin back at Lake Crusoe, and she refused to say who it went to. I had one letter in my personal drawer back in the Oasis. It wasn't addressed to anyone. I'd written it because I wanted to leave behind, well, something. In my letter I'd thanked my friends for everything, and I declared how wrong it was to have had so many people, so many Wranglers live and die without recognition. The world owed them its gratitude, not its silence. I realized that if I didn't survive this mission, then most likely none of us would. Hell, I wasn't even sure if the Oasis would survive. Might get bombed into oblivion if the military decided to nuke the region, or the MLs would get bored and rampage through it. It was likely no one would ever read my letter. I really should have left it at my old apartment. Well, it's funny what worries us right before we take the free fall into darkness, isn't it? The cargo passageway hadn't changed in the slightest since I'd laid eyes on it last, but now it reminded me of a python's throat, one long, hungry tunnel slowly sending you to your doom. The 4 of us stood in front of it, giving our equipment and weapons a final check. Near us were the 4 soldiers stationed at the mouth of the tunnel, giving us looks that simultaneously conveyed, "Go get 'em, Team Abbott," and, "Oh, glad we're not you guys." They'd set up another light machine gun and a few snares as part of their defensive line. Better than nothing, but patently inadequate. Laszlo and Theo did radio checks with the 2 radios Tanaka had bequeathed us. They both observed increased distortion in the transmissions. Not surprising, since it felt like the buzzing in my head had ramped up a level or 2. It was like talking on the phone in your bedroom while a neighbor outside your window air blew their lawn constantly. Any doubt I had left about the source of the blind anomaly was gone. Theo tested out his exoskeleton one final time, moving his frame about in a rigid fashion. He didn't seem happy with the results. "Yeah, this thing lists to the right slightly. I suppose it's too late to get a tune-up." "Damn it, Theo, I'm a hacker, not a mechanic," replied Laszlo, doing a very bad Dr. McCoy impression. It still elicited a chuckle from one of the other soldiers. The tunnel was wide enough for Madison and Theo to advance side by side. Madison had insisted on this arrangement, as she didn't think Theo could react quickly enough from point, but she definitely didn't want him right behind her. It was clear she didn't trust this new piece of military equipment. I couldn't tell if our earlier talk had helped her at all, but she seemed ready for a fight just the same. "Anyone want an uplifting speech before we go in?" Theo asked. If you do, I hope you have one, because I'm all fresh out. No speech is needed, said Madison, taking her first steps into the tunnel. We know who we are. Yeah, we do, I said. Theo and Laszlo echoed the sentiment as we passed into the tunnel together. The murky tunnel kept to a straight shot for at least 100 feet, the only remarkable features being the rail track travelling up the centre. It felt like a subway passage at times, a thought that occasionally triggered an irrational fear in me regarding a rail car materialising out of the dark to run us down. Somehow that was more comforting than the real threats we were likely to encounter. Our first significant landmark proved to be a pair of doors to our right, clearly marked with nice white lettering that told us we'd found the generator room and a custodial closet. Both doors were locked with no damage present. The MLs likely hadn't gained entrance. I commented with dismay that we might have gotten electrical power supplied to the facility had we explored the tunnel earlier, but Madison pointed out that these generators had been sitting around for decades and were probably in serious disrepair. In any case, we called in our discovery to Tanaka, and he agreed to move up the defensive line to the doors after his soldiers cleared the 2 rooms. Not far from the doors, the floor began to gently angle downward, while simultaneously curving to the left. It took a couple more minutes of travel before we came to the conclusion that we were in a downward spiral. The wall on the left-hand side of the tunnel took on a more metallic appearance as we continued. Laszlo observed that we had to be walking around a chamber of some type, perhaps the famous test chamber we'd heard so much about. Gaining entrance to it was apparently not going to be a simple adventure. We dropped at least a full story before we came across a yellow line painted across the floor. Dingy and faded, it marked some unknown milestone in the passage. As I stepped over it, I swear that the buzzing in my head escalated even further, as if my pesky neighbour had added a second air blower to the mix. I suddenly had a sharp desire to turn around, to declare this mission over and have us retreat to the relative safety of the cargo room. The others halted in their tracks as well, and I have to wonder if they were experiencing that same doubt. But we had a kind of inertia working in our favour, the type where kinship and duty can override survival instincts. I managed to withstand the momentary burst of doubt, as did the others, but the feeling never did go away completely. In hindsight, I now think the yellow line was a warning marker. The scientists who created this facility must have known that their experiments would create some kind of emission or radiation, and that yellow line marked the point where staff might feel some kind of effect. Not far past the yellow line, Theo's exoskeleton began to stumble and would have toppled over had he not been next to a wall and able to brace himself. Well, as luck would have it, the floor had unexpectedly levelled out in this section, so it was as good a place as any to stop and inspect the machine. As Theo detached from the exoskeleton and Laszlo attempted to diagnose it, Madison and I elected to guard the scene, Madison taking the forward position while I took the rear. We didn't expect trouble to come from behind us at this point, but one didn't survive as a wrangler purely on expectations. As I listened to Laszlo swear at the exoskeleton, I took up sweeping my light over the walls of the tunnel in a methodical fashion, mostly to occupy my mind by catching something interesting to look at. That's when I caught something interesting, an odd splotch of bluish-white substance that immediately reminded me of the crystalline residue that came from converted ML bodies. The same stuff infecting our subverted iPad. This bit resembled the vein-like pattern slime mold took as it grew, and I moved my beam and I found a thin trail of it snaking along the wall, leading down the tunnel. I felt my insides clinch up as I stared at it, debating whether to declare it to the others or to scrutinize it further. I was leaning into the smarter choice, telling my friends, when the substance glowed. Well, I thought it had glowed at least. A faint spurt of blue in the darkness, barely visible but there nonetheless. The entire strand had lit up ever so lightly. At that moment I felt oddly compelled to move closer, like the compulsion one gets when your curiosity overwhelms one's common sense. The residue tempted me with a new discovery, and I took a step toward it, and then another, and so on. The closer I got, the less threatening it seemed, and the more I wanted to touch it. When I was within arm's reach, I stretched out my hand and touched a finger to the substance. It felt chalky and delicate, yet I also got a peculiar tingle out of it. My mind began to whirl with fragmented images, jumbles of memories that came and went in a split second. Most of them were snapshots of random people, places and things, as if a bunch of memories had been thrown in a blender and then reassembled from the mix. A few came with a brief twinge of pain, as if they were incompatible with my mind. Those images focused on some kind of foreign landscape, with sharp, narrow, towering mountain peaks, featureless and barren of all life, and all underneath a blood-red sky. Came to a hasty end when my hand was yanked away. The turmoil faded instantly as Madison's stern face filled my vision. "What the hell, Hector?" she said, working an uncertain tone between anger and concern. Well, I couldn't answer at first. I wasn't even sure where I was for a few seconds. I looked back at the war residue, and my mental clouds lifted enough for me to get my bearings. Fear replaced my earlier curiosity. What the hell indeed, Hector? I don't know, I stuttered. I tried to explain my compulsion, but I think Madison only half heard me. She was now looking at the stuff directly, and I saw her expression change to something softer. But then she shook her head hard and pulled a knife from her belt sheath. She scraped at the substance and knocked a piece off. It crumbled into nothing before it even hit the ground. At almost the same time, another minute burst of light came from the substance. Madison took a step back as it happened, having seen it this time. Either that or she noticed the other thing I just picked up on, that the edges of the substance had grown an inch in tandem with the glow, continuing its slow expansion along the wall. "Something interesting about the wall?" Laszlo's teasing remark foretold her arrival as she and Theo came up to us, still out of his exoskeleton. She then noticed the substance and her eyes widened. "Well, shit." "Well, try not to look at it directly," advised Madison. "It's surprisingly attractive." Once the residue did its glow and expand routine once more, we were all on the same page. Theo ordered us to look around the tunnel for other residue paths, and in short order we found a few more trails clinging to the walls, mostly on the ceiling. Now, whenever they glowed, I could make them out with little effort. "Hey, this stuff's getting brighter," I pointed out. "I agree," said Madison. "Whatever this substance is linked to, whatever anomaly the MLs are propagating, I think it's intensifying. We'd better get moving." With Laszlo's help, Theo managed to get strapped into the exoskeleton. He still leaned too much for comfort, but Theo altered his gait to compensate. I was beginning to wonder if the exoskeleton was worth the effort, but after discovering the walls were sporting alien growth, I was willing to risk it for the added firepower. The tunnel began to descend and spiral again as we continued, and I found it harder to concentrate as we progressed. Maybe it was the pressing realization that the Meat Locusts were further along in their plans than previously thought, or it was the fact that I had to keep looking away from the walls to keep from getting entranced. The uncanny nightlights littering the tunnel grew thicker and more proliferate the further down we went. Some spots had tumorous projections that acted as junctions, new tendrils sprouting outward in multiple directions along the wall. Or for some reason the material avoided the floor, which I was thankful for. Theo began to curse at regular intervals as he struggled to keep the exoskeleton moving. Madison had gone silent and steely once again, falling further into herself. Laszlo kept talking to herself, rattling off potential names for the substance growing on the walls. As for me, I couldn't shake the feeling we'd stopped walking through a human construction and had accidentally stumbled into the bloodstream of a humongous creature. I had the feeling that if we didn't bump into something we couldn't shoot soon, our so-called hardened Wrangler demeanors were going to crack wide open. We reached another level spot in our spiraling descent. The glow from the walls was strong enough now that we could see most of the tunnel without difficulty, so it was hard to miss the solitary, four-armed figure standing in the tunnel, stone still and seemingly lifeless. We brought up our weapons at once, outlining the Reaper's body with our lights. The Reaper was turned toward the wall to our right, its form stuck as if it was playing a game of freeze tag. It didn't look calcified, and it didn't look dead. "I think we should just blast it," commented Madison in a low tone. "No, wait, it's our turncoat," Laszlo hurriedly stated. "Look at its knees." Sure enough, it was scarred in the right places. Our missing Reaper informant had been found again. "I still think we should blast it," Madison replied. She almost did so, not out of spite, but because the Reaper suddenly moved, its right leg taking a long step forward toward the wall, then stopping and going rigid again. I looked at its face and saw its intense grimace, as if it was in great pain or great anger. I could swear its eyes were now staring my way. "Damn, there's a door right there," said Theo, pointing his light at the wall our Reaper was aiming at. Sure enough, half covered by residue tendrils was an unremarkable door, adorned with the words, "Exam Lab 2. God, had we been missing other doors, other rooms? A disquieting thought, though I had no urge to backtrack and look. Laszlo was already pulling out the subverted iPad from her backpack, and she made a brief chuckle as it turned on, showing us what was on the display. She'd prepped a text screen and already had new words on it. "You're here, finally." "Oh, so this is happening," Laszlo commented. "My first conversation with a Reaper. God, I wish I could record it." "Hector, ask it what's happening," Theo instructed me, training his machine gun on the creature. "It understands you, Theo," I replied. "Yeah, I don't trust myself to be civil," he growled, and I understood. This thing had murdered his best friend, and he was remaining polite merely by not blowing it into chunky bits. Laszlo gave me the iPad as I turned to the Reaper, took a deep breath, and started the conversation. "Why didn't you come to us?" I didn't see its eyes blink this time. Perhaps it couldn't blink in its current state of paralysis. But the words materialized on the screen as before. "No, trust others. You not make deal with leader." "Well, we were busy not dying," said Laszlo. I gave her the cut the comments look, and she made a conciliatory gesture. "Look, what she said's correct," I added. "What's happening to you right now?" "Came down to hide. Blending growing stronger. Hard to resist. Room protects." "I must be talking about the exam room," said Madison after I read the words to the group. She pointed at the door our Reaper was heading for. "Perhaps it's shielded from the blind's radiation." "Hey, can you tell me what the blending is doing?" I asked the creature. There was a long delay before the words came this time, the Reaper's body shifting slightly as it slowly moved towards its supposed salvation. "Get Reaper into room. We'll tell you." "Oh, no way in hell," said Theo. "We're not getting into a room alone with this thing." "Look, probably the only way we can get it to cooperate," I said. "How about threatening its life?" said Madison. "Look, if it doesn't get protection, it's going to get blended, I guess," I replied. "It's dead either way." "If it wants our help, it has to give me a reason," said Theo. "How about telling us what these tendrils on the wall mean?" There was another long delay. I think the Reaper was debating how cooperative to be at that point. He must have decided to appease Theo because new words finally showed up. "Extensions of blending. Absorbing special energy. Preparing region 4. It paused again, and then added, "Process. Hard to describe. May affect your minds." I saw its face soften for a moment, as if it had gotten a reprieve from the mental assault. It twisted its head our way and formed a smirk. "No more. Get Reaper to room. Leave in room. We'll tell you what to attack to stop it." I read aloud the words and gave Theo a hard look. "That's a deal we can't ignore, Theo. I'll go in there if I have to." "Might just decide to snack on you instead, Hector," said Madison. "No, he's right," Theo declared through gritted teeth. "We need to know what to do, but I'll go in instead. Just keep your gun on him. If it tries anything, waste it." Theo detached the SAW from its swivel mount and handed it off to Madison, who quietly took the weapon, even though her eyes were declaring matters as a bad idea. Theo moved behind the Reaper, took a moment to size him up, and began pushing the Reaper's back. Despite the straining actuators and Theo's grunting, his efforts increased the Reaper's speed to a crawl. An improvement over the previous foot-an-hour rate, but we couldn't afford the delay. I gave the iPad back to Laszlo and slung my carbine. Trying my best to hide my revulsion at the gritty feel of the creature's skin, and pulled with all my strength. Well, it barely helped, but it was better than watching. A minute of exertion went by as I sweated and strained against the Herculean strength of the Reaper. In that time, we'd gone several feet, but I could have reached out and touched the doorframe at that point. I snuck a peek at the creature's face, and it was still unnaturally calm, almost amused. Perhaps it had fought off the blending's influence and was pleased with itself. Or perhaps it was holding dark thoughts about eating our brains when all this was over. Regardless, I found its expression discomforting. Well, that is, until its mouth suddenly jerked as if spasming. His eyes changed colour, losing their human quality and changing to the familiar black holes of the MLs. It happened so quickly that I barely had a chance to register it, much less react, and before I knew it, the arm I'd grabbed was grabbing me instead, right at my neckline. It lifted me off my feet as if I weighed as much as a kitten. I wheezed as my airway constricted, unable to choke out a single syllable. Then I went airborne as it heaved me away. I slammed into the wall next to the doorway, my back screaming with pain as I hit one of the wall tumors, breaking it open and spreading a cloud of residue all around me. I saw Theo, wrestling with the bastard, managing to hold his own against two of the thing's arms thanks to his exoskeleton, but then quickly getting outclassed as the Reaper brought all 4 arms to bear. I saw Laszlo move in with a shotgun, and then the old world blacked out, and a new one played before my eyes. Part 4. Much like before, it started with a flurry of human images, the familiar parade of memories from people like you and me. But then the alien landscape showed up, along with the throbbing pain that went with it. In this land, there were no rocks or loose dirt, no colour beyond an omnipresent grey and the dark red sky. It felt like no landscape I'd seen on our world, or any planet I knew of. It was too smooth, too unnatural. The mountains were more like gigantic needles, the kind a sea urchin defended itself with. In short order, the human memories faded completely, replaced by the landscape, the pain, and, well, something else. As the biting pain became constant, a Reaper materialized before me, standing in this land of desolation as if preparing to be my tour guide. Except I could tell it wasn't really there, and it wasn't really a Reaper. It was a ghostly outline, translucent, reamed in a pale blue aura that flowed around it like water. Nearby another Reaper appeared, and this one I recognized as our erstwhile ally. It looked upon the Phantom Reaper with something akin to fear. The Phantom Reaper turned its attention to the real one, whose knees quivered and then buckled as it bowed to the Phantom, an act of supplication much like what would have happened to the bestial Reaper. Phantom Reaper seemed satisfied by this, and thus turned back to me. Its facial expression was hidden under its blue aura, but glowing black eyes bore into me. I didn't know black could glow, yet in this horrid mindscape it certainly could. Impressions appeared in my thoughts, but with no voice. This thing didn't have a voice like we did. Its thoughts came into my head as if my brain was just another text program. I could sense what it desired. Everything. It saw me as a crumb, a mere morsel that dared to think better of itself. I sensed it had existed for untold millennia. It had seen cosmic delights and terrors I couldn't even conceive of. And it was almost here. Conditions were almost right. I could feel its eagerness permeating my mind like a foul smell. The hunger. Oh, the hunger. This was the Lord. Not a physical thing, not another construct, but a mind of unfathomable age and intellect. And yet it could only stand there judging me. In this mental land, in this place that mirrored its true home, it couldn't do anything more. It couldn't touch me. Well, not yet. Hector! Another shocking swerve of an awakening hit me as Laszlo's face hovered in front of mine. I found myself leaning against the wall I collided with, my back throbbing but my head clearing. She saw recognition in my eyes and sighed in relief. "Oh, please stop doing that," she politely begged. "Where did you go?" "Well, to a meeting with the Lord," I stated. I don't know if I was trying to be funny, but based on Laszlo's horrified face, I certainly failed to achieve humor. Past her, Theo was standing next to the remains of the exoskeleton as Madison applied a bandage to his right forearm. Madison had a long slash across her vest in the chest region, but no sign of injury. Thankfully, our Wrangler vests had been designed to withstand some degree of biting and clawing, but whatever had hit Madison had nearly torn it in two. I presumed our former Reaper ally had done the damage. I asked what had happened while I was out. In a nutshell, Theo and the Reaper had a brief wrestling match before Laszlo pumped a few shotgun shells into the Reaper's face. The Reaper reacted by fleeing down the tunnel. Madison had zigged when she should have zagged, resulting in a slash vest and a broken rifle. "I told you we should have blasted it," said Madison. No time for a told you so," replied Theo. "You okay, Hector?" Despite the ache in my back and the residual throbbing in my head, I'd escaped serious injury. "I'll live. For what it's worth, Madison, Theo made the right call. He was fighting for control, and, well, I learned things." Madison and Theo came over to me as I relayed my newest experience. "I think I was hooked into the blending. I think the other Reapers are already part of it, and the human memories of the people they've eaten as well. I think they're integrating all their minds into one construct, and the Lord is a type of controlling intellect, coming from some dark place in the universe," I explained. The blending, it's all for bringing the Lord here, where it'll take full control of the MLs." Madison glared at me. "How do you know you're not getting your brain scrambled, Hector? How can you trust anything you saw?" I shrugged helplessly. I can't. It's all we have at this stage." "It makes sense, don't you think?" said Laszlo. "I'm starting to think Hector's one of those sensitive types, like Sylvester Colby was. That's why the Reaper went to you instead of the rest of us. Maybe your mind's more compatible to their version of a psychic network." "Are they opening a wormhole?" asked Theo. "Don't know," I said. "I think the thin point is something they can use to connect their Reaper radiation to the Lord. From that point on, I don't know how it goes." "I can guess," said Laszlo. "For starters, imagine the blind covering the entire planet. The only real advantage we have over the MLs is our tech. Take away communication and computers and we're a bunch of disorganized apes shooting in all directions. Meanwhile, the Lord will coordinate the Meat Locusts into a single army with one mind in charge." Well, I mostly agreed with Laszlo, but her hypothesis didn't feel complete. "There's something else to it as well," I said. "Something worse. All I know is if the law gets into our world, that's it. Everything is done." "We need Tanaka and the rest of the troops," Theo urgently declared. "Don't you think it's a little late for that?" Madison shot back. "I don't know how much of this insanity I believe, but even I can tell that we're running out of time." Theo's eyes bore into Madison. "We still don't know what we're walking into," he said, his tone alternating between anger and desperation. "These tendrils are the tip of the iceberg, and it's already messing with our heads. I'm not throwing our lives away for a mission we can't win, especially since we just got most of our gear wrecked." "Not all of it," Laszlo said sheepishly. As the rest of us turned to her, she took off her backpack, opened it, and showed us its contents. My jaw dropped when I saw the 3 bundles of dynamite, each bundle composed of 7 sticks. I'm no explosives expert, but I was pretty damn sure that was enough to turn the 4 of us into confetti if they detonated. "Jeez," said Madison. "You've been carrying this the entire time?" "It's military dynamite," she explained. "I figured we might need it." Theo closed his eyes and shook his head, somehow managing to calm down despite the circumstances. None of my usual breathing techniques were working this time out, and I was feeling squeezed all over. "Well, this doesn't change anything, Laz," Theo calmly stated. "The hell it doesn't," Laszlo snapped back. "Madison's right, Theo. If we leave now, even if it's to get reinforcements, the Lord's going to show up and eat the world." "Yeah, but don't we have radios?" I asked. "We don't," Theo admitted. "The Reaper radiation's too thick now. Even the prototypes don't work." "Then we know what we have to do, don't we?" I said, hating the words as I said them, but knowing them to be the truth. "We do," said Laszlo, looking not at me but her boyfriend, putting her hand to his cheek. And you know it too. Madison looked away, acting like she was watching for threats from the tunnel ahead of us. I like to think she was giving the two of them a measure of privacy. I think Madison had always known that the Wrangler life would kill her eventually, but she'd made her peace with ending that way. That's why she'd been willing to sacrifice her life for me all those months ago, while she continued to be so gung-ho against the Meat Locusts. But Theo wasn't like that. He'd made friends with Abbott and had fallen in love with Laszlo. His consternation wasn't the pressure of command, but the concern of a man who had dared to care for the people that shared this dangerous life with him. His reward for caring, it seemed, was to have all of us die. We'd dodged death, cheated fate, and fought the monsters at every turn, but the odds had diminished too far. He knew what we all knew. If we went any further, we wouldn't be coming back intact. Theo held Laszlo's hand for a long moment, then gently removed it from his face. He took Laszlo's pack and zipped it closed, then donned it himself. I actually know how to plan charges, so it only makes sense that I carry it, he stated. Laszlo grabbed her shotgun and didn't argue, though the sad look in her eyes made it clear that she wasn't happy with winning the debate. Madison politely kept her mouth shut as she took up the light machine gun that was now detached from the exoskeleton. I offered my carbine to Theo, but he declined it, instead pulling out a pistol and flicking off the safety. And so, here we were, not far from the end of it all. Exhausted, terrified, sore and sad, I still managed a bit of pride within that hurricane of negative feelings. 4 Wranglers set against the end of the world. It was the most romantic of hopeless battles. I could at least pretend that our tale would be shared amongst a future generation, even if the odds were good that there wouldn't be one. Locust matter. It was the name Laszlo came up with for the semi-organic material that liberally coated the walls. As we walked the last leg of the tunnel toward the entrance to the test chamber, the locust matter became so thick that it was impossible not to look at. I think Laszlo had the right of it, as usual. I found myself drifting toward the walls, feeling a terrible desire to strike up conversation with the Lord again. I felt oddly disjointed and off balance much of the time, so much so that Laszlo took to locking arms with me to keep me from wandering. As we completed another loop in the spiral, the tunnel walls utterly disappeared under the weight of the locust matter. Their glow bursts were so bright now that we had no problem seeing every detail of each grotesque tumor and growth surrounding us. There was no way this degree of growth was solely the product of transformed locusts. Some other power, some new reality-bending trick was being deployed. The floor remained remarkably unblemished, and I could only assume that it was deliberate. The locust matter did seem particularly delicate to kinetic impact, so perhaps keeping the floor clear was a means to minimize damage. Or perhaps it was a ruse created to funnel ambitious humans into a kill zone. At that point I felt what a drug addict must feel when shot up full of their favorite opiate. The world kept slipping out from under me, replaced with half-seen images of alien vistas and an oppressive force demanding I reconnect with it. The only way I could fight the impulse was to close my eyes and reduce the hypnotic pull of the locust matter's ghostly light. I asked the others to leave me behind, that I was more of a liability than an asset in this state. Madison argued otherwise and said that she would keep tabs on me if no one else could. She stated that I was hooked into whatever thing was calling the shots and that my insight might matter. I think she was hiding a more sentimental reason, simply not wanting to abandon me. Laszlo said she could handle me and handed off her shotgun to Theo as she guided me toward our final fate. It was a nice warm moment to momentarily distract me from the approaching horror and the omnipresent entity clawing at my mind. The remainder of my journey felt like a half-awake dream as I trusted Laszlo to guide me. I spent more time contemplating the situation than paying attention to the environment. I noticed the lack of claws and teeth biting into me. I considered our enemy's strategy in all this, why they'd left their most important asset virtually unguarded. They must have used up all their Reapers and spare MLs creating this project. Perhaps they knew that secrecy was their one real advantage. Stockpiling an army of MLs in one place would have invited a bombing from the military, so it was better to draw attention elsewhere and hide their true objective. And it almost worked. Had Dr. Tanaka not discovered the anomaly, all this might have gone unnoticed until it was too late, assuming it wasn't already too late. But we discovered it in the end, with the help of the rogue Reaper, which is why the enemy brought in a swarm of MLs in a last-ditch effort to stop us. But now all our respective reinforcements were far too far away. It felt a little crazy to have the fate of the world decided by a handful of individuals, but here we were nonetheless. I wondered if the 7 fatalities from 1974 were really from an accident. Maybe they were test subjects of sorts, with the scientists succeeding in provoking a response from the thin point. Maybe the results scared the military brass into shutting everything down again. Whatever the case might be, it was yet one more example of why people keeping secrets never turns out well. If the leaders of our world had come clean about thin points and MLs and every other terrible truth years ago, well, I'm sure there would be fear and chaos and pain in the short run. We might have come out stronger for it. Maybe the world would have been ready for a time like this, instead of dancing on a knife's edge. And then, with no fanfare or warning, we were at the bottom. I still can't recall how much I missed on the way down. I must have been extremely out of it because I jumped from Laszlo walking me down the tunnel to having her shake me into full awareness. As I opened my eyes and regained my wits, I felt cold terror fill me. We were now standing in front of a huge steel doorframe, the open gate engulfed in locust matter. There was a human-sized jagged hole through the locust matter, as if something had punched its way inside. Had our erstwhile ally done the damage? Was the Lord inviting us in, or had the Reaper wrestled control back for one instance, long enough to perform an act of defiance? Theo was poring through Laszlo's backpack, pulling out a bundle of dynamite and extracting 2 sticks from it. He then cut the fuses short with his survival knife. He looked at me and shrugged. "I need something I can use against a Reaper," he explained. Well, I don't know much about explosives, but those fuses could only have several seconds of lag time now. "Do we have a strategy?" asked Laszlo. "Well, other than going inside and not dying?" "Look for something important and blow it up," said Theo. "Madison shoots anything moving that isn't us. Hector tells us what to look for. Laz, you stay with him." "You up for this?" Laszlo asked me quietly into my ear, as if afraid the others would hear. "Well, as up for it as I can be," I answered. Already I was feeling the world begin to spin again, and I was merely at the front door of the chamber. It could only get worse going inside. I had nowhere to know if I could keep my mind in one piece, much less provide any useful information. But the point of no return was long behind us, and I wasn't about to let my comrades face the heart of the Meat Locusts without me. We entered the doorway, Theo forging ahead, followed by Madison. Laszlo kept her guiding hands on my shoulders as I went next. Stepping into the chamber for me was the mental equivalent of my brain walking into a sauna after having spent hours in Arctic conditions. I resisted the urge to scream as a surge of pain swept through my head. I only kept my feet thanks to Laszlo. But the surge ebbed away as quickly as it came. The pain receded, and I was able to stand under my own power. And I could see. Oh God, how could I see? We'd undertaken this operation with no clue what to expect from Colby's test chamber. We knew it was a large room, at least 4 stories tall, circular, and heavily shielded against radiation. I figured it would resemble an old-fashioned sci-fi lab with all kinds of gizmos and devices. The actual chamber had parts of this image, but it was all hidden underneath a nightmare layer of locust matter. Every square millimeter of wall and floor was covered, every part glowing with that terrible aqua luminance that I had come to hate. Human technology had been co-opted here, submerged under the weight of an alien power. But it was the parts that I could recognize that tore out my soul, for scattered about the chamber were mounds composed of locust bodies and reaper bodies, calcified, twisting, merging. The construct I'd seen come to life in an earlier video was here, along with several other similar abominations situated around the chamber. One hung from the ceiling like a grotesque stalactite. Each construct had protrusions reaching out from its top, tendrils and malformed hands, and even tree-like structures stretching toward the center of the room. These mounds were positioned so that if they kept growing, they would connect. Some of the limbs were already merging with their closest neighbors, creating a crude and broken latticework. But just like on the outside, the locust matter continued to grow with each new pulse, the limbs adding an inch or two in the process. God, how many MLs had sacrificed themselves to create all this? The amount had to be in the hundreds, perhaps even over 1,000. How many had died, people that is, to fuel this horror? Well, that was a number I didn't want to guess at. I was feeling sickened already, partly due to the feel of the locust matter shifting under my feet, and partly because there were too many other disturbing phenomena demanding my attention. No one could hide from the locust matter or the alien glow that lit up the chamber, but I knew I was the only one seeing the third layer superimposed on the scene. Something else was here with us, a dark, swirling cloud that settled over the matter like a fine spray. It collected around the constructs and climbed up the protuberances, reaching out with grasping hands for the rest of its substance. The cloud jerked spasmodically like a living thing at times. It ignored our presence for now, for which I was glad. I suspected it was a manifestation of the Lord, parts of it at least, gaining strength as the locust matter completed its construction. I couldn't see any sign of the rogue Reaper, and it found another hiding spot in the tunnel, or had it merged with the bodies within this chamber. I didn't really care what had happened to it, so long as its fate didn't involve us any longer. Theo was moving about the room, exploring it, but keeping a wide berth from the mounds themselves. Madison took a position near the door, bracing herself the best she could so she could bring the machine gun to bear. I hadn't realized Laszlo was still handling me until I tried to move and found Laszlo's hands on my shoulders. I think I'm good, Laszlo, I told her. She was reluctant to believe me, but she finally let go after I repeated myself more emphatically. I was starting to think that she needed support from me more than I needed it from her, as her wide-eyed stare showed how rattled she was. We shouldn't be in here any longer than we need to, she said. Any hints as to what we should blow up? All of it, I suggested, my attempt at a half-assed joke. I don't think we have enough dynamite to do that, she replied. The answer seemed obvious to me. Target as many mounds as possible. But I looked about one last time just to be sure. I found myself staring at the center of the room, where all the protuberances were heading. If there was a thin point there, I couldn't see or feel it. Perhaps it wasn't something that human perception could really process. But as I looked upon the center, I thought I could see a ghostly image hovering in midair. Too faded to trigger recognition, I nonetheless turned my head away from it. With any luck, the image wouldn't get any clearer because this whole place would be rubble in short order. I pointed at the closest mound. Hey, these things seem important, I said. Let's start there. Laszlo nodded and looked around, taking stock of the other structures. She yelled over to Theo what I'd just said. Theo began extracting dynamite from his pack. Laszlo spaced out for a moment as she did some mental calculating. We can't do anything about the one on the ceiling, but I think 4 sticks per mound should do it. We definitely don't want to be in the room, though. Theo had made his way back to us, wearing a face that spoke of deep disquiet. Yeah, can we be sure it'll stop the process? He asked. Don't know, said Laszlo. Definitely slow it down. Unless you saw something else that we should blow up. Yeah, I think it's our best bet. Right, then follow my instructions to the letter, Theo instructed. We're not dying because we got sloppy at the finish line. Laszlo and I quietly went to work, untying and rewrapping dynamite into smaller bundles, twisting fuses into unified strings. I left my carbine with Laszlo, and I took up the dynamite and began to deliver them to their target locations. I approached each mound with great caution, afraid of touching the constructs and gently mentally being ensnared again. But it seemed as long as I didn't touch the locust matter with bare skin, I was okay. In fact, I was feeling more and more like myself as time went on. I started to hope I was becoming inured to the effects of the energy emissions, or at least had learned how to function within their zone. Perhaps I should have learned not to get too hopeful. Because as I was about to place the third and final bundle on top of a particularly twisted-looking mound, I found myself staring at the face of a Reaper corpse sticking out of the construct. I was struck by how unemotional it looked, despite the rest of its body having fused with the other corpses to resemble a macabre bramble. I stopped and looked into its 2 human eyes, contemplating what it had to have been like to have your body transform like that. I lost track of time, faintly aware of a voice asking what the hell I was doing, but more aware of a different voice, a stronger voice, asking me to stay right there and wait a little longer. It would solve all my problems if I just stood there like a good morsel, and... Then a strong hand pulled me away from the mound just as a vicious limb swiped the air my head had occupied a second prior. The world reasserted itself as I realized the thing in front of me wasn't mound-shaped any longer. Theo dragged me backwards as the figure rising up loomed over us, the face that had hypnotized me looking down from its newest creation. It should have tipped me off that this particular mound had no protuberances growing out of its top. I should have recognized the Reaper's face as that of the one that had attempted to turn against its lord. I shouldn't have dismissed our missing Reaper as unimportant, because the Lord had anticipated our arrival and had prepared. It had new arms and legs now. These ones were composed of other bodies, wrapped around each other, acting as sinew and nerve fibers for a new, bigger form. Only 2 arms this time around, and they were too large and long for the torso they were linked to. But I don't think the Lord cared about symmetry. For that was the mind I'd seen with those Reaper eyes. The Lord was here, hovering over the constructs, controlling this newest monstrosity. Still only part of it, I realized. A single finger had found its way to Earth, but it was enough to take control of the rogue and drive me to false complacency. And this would be punishment for all of us. The Reaper got to participate in the blending it had sought to avoid, and we got to die moments from victory. "Run!" cried out Theo, and I had no trouble complying. He was right behind me as the Reaper giant swung its arm and clipped his left shoulder. Barely a hit, yet it spun him around and caused him to trip over a ground tumor, sending him sprawling. The air suddenly filled with thunderous noise as Madison brought the saw to bear, perforating the Reaper's giant chest with holes. It barely reacted to the bullets, but it did turn its attention away from us for a moment. Laszlo stood near the doorway, positioned over a series of fuse lines that were to be our source of detonation. Now she opened fire with my carbine. The Reaper giant took a step forward, and then another, its 10-foot frame moving like a man on stilts, yet closing fast. Madison shifted her fire to its left knee, the bullets ripping converted limbs in half. The giant staggered and fell on its ruined leg. Without missing a beat, it reached out with its right hand and snagged the fuse lines on the ground, pulling them away from the door. The damnable thing knew what we were up to. Laszlo cried out in denial as she emptied the carbine into the thing. Madison tried to shift her fire, but her machine gun didn't cooperate. She yelled something about a jam, threw down the weapon, and pulled out her own pistol. As they tried valiantly to stop the Reaper giant, I went to Theo to hopefully get him to his feet. The sizzling sound I overheard told me that he had different ideas. His strong grip took my arm and pulled me to the ground as a hissing stick of dynamite went sailing from its position. "Get down!" he screamed. Madison reacted quicker than Laszlo, crashing into her and dragging them both behind a nearby mound. The Reaper giant twisted its torso, looking at the incoming projectile, its face utterly neutral. Maybe it knew what it was, maybe it didn't. I didn't see the rest as I ducked my head and prayed I wasn't still in the path of the blast. The ear-splitting explosion took away my hearing for several long seconds, the blast wave passing over me but doing little else. I rose again, my ears ringing as Theo took to his feet and fired off his shotgun at the shambling remains of the giant. The blast had taken half the creature's face off and big chunks of its torso, but such damage was an inconvenience at most. The fuse lines were coiled underneath its body as it lashed its arms about in wide, aggressive sweeps. It appeared content to guard the fuses instead of attacking. Amidst the insanity of the battle, I felt the air shift, as if a windstorm were brewing inside the chamber. Fearing what that meant, I chanced to look at the center of the room. The locust matter must have increased its rate of growth while we'd been otherwise distracted, for the protuberances were less than a few feet away from meeting us. The dark energy surrounding the limbs began to flow like streams of water, bridging the gap between the limbs, becoming an ethereal latticework of power. The faded image in the center took on a harder clarity, becoming a translucent sphere now that overlooked the extraterrestrial land I'd seen in my visions. This time, we were far above the landscape, practically in the stratosphere. The pointed peaks of the alien spires made the world resemble a baseball covered in needles. Several of the spires ended in odd flat spots, as if their peaks had been shaved off by a gigantic chisel. Something about those flat regions bothered me more than any other detail, and as the clarity improved, I could finally see why. Those mountains connected to other spheres like the one I was looking through. The peaks weren't shaved off. They were piercing the spheres, disappearing into them. Some people say the unknown is the greatest fear humankind knows. Well, I beg to differ. At that moment, so many pieces fell into place that I knew I would never know peace again. I understood that every sphere was a thin point to another place, another world. I understood that even if this planet I currently looked upon had been once composed of minerals and earth, all that matter had been replaced by semi-living substance millennia ago. This planet was the Lord. The dark energies swirling before me, the crude Reaper avatar I communicated with, all that was just its extensions. This thing was the true connoisseur, the chief horror behind the army that assailed our world. The Meat Locusts and the Flesh Reapers were just tools, creative constructs, or the pilfered remnants of other races, or perhaps a hint of what the Lord once was, before science or nature, or a sick version of universal humor, created this being. As the Meat Locusts had feasted on humanity, this cosmic abomination would feast on our planet, converting it. Humanity had just been a resource, a means to create animate tools that would then construct the way back to the source. Once its surface touched ours, that was it. Our world would belong to the Lord, and its destruction would only be a matter of time. I could feel the Lord in my head now. Not words, but a driving need, a constant hunger. This was not some being of enigmatic purpose. Its motivations were as old as life itself. In fact, it was the only motivation it had left. All its power, all its intellect, all its ego, yet it was as simple as the microbes that lived on my skin. The view shifted. Our vantage point began to lower toward the planet, the point of a narrow spire rapidly growing bigger. With profound, panicky horror, I realized we had mere minutes before the Lord penetrated the sphere, and that blind terror finally knocked me out of my stupor. I had been out of it for close to a minute, it seemed, as the battle scene had changed to a frightening degree. The Reaper Giant had ignored me completely while it fought my companions, its arms having morphed at some point into a pack of thinner tendrils that whipped around like hyperactive snakes. Madison had managed to clear the saw and was using it to rip apart one cluster of tendrils. Theo and Laszlo were near the chamber door, Theo lying on his back and gritting his teeth while Laszlo applied pressure to a nasty-looking wound on his left leg. The fight had become a stalemate, the giant keeping my team at bay but unable to kill us in return. I couldn't tell if they could see the approaching doom in the center of the room. It didn't matter if they did, not with the giant in the way. No way to get to the fuses. But I still had a dynamite bundle in my hand, and a butane lighter in my pocket. All I needed was the right target. Underneath the stabilizing portal, one of the mounds drew dark energy to it like a magnet attracts metal filaments. The energy pooled and then zipped up the latticework in rapid spurts, and with each spurt the portal grew terrifyingly clear. If any part of this infernal construct could be called a weak point, it had to be there. We'd already placed a bundle on that mound. My own bundle should detonate it. But I had to get in close. I felt like I was trapped in slow motion as I moved toward the portal, striking the butane lighter and burning the bundle's fuses into life. I didn't know how much time I had, 40 seconds at best. I knew I wasn't going to survive this. I wasn't sure any of us would. But my body didn't want to work right. I hadn't shaken off the Lord entirely, and it knew what I was attempting. I jerked and stumbled, barely keeping my feet as I closed in on the central mound. I heard something huge screech bloody murder behind me. I dared not look back. The Lord pressed its weighty voice on my mind now, demanding my surrender, oppressing me with its conviction that I was nothing compared to it, that I deserved to be consumed along with the rest of my world. The fragments of dark energy lacing the room began to arc toward me now, surrounding me, crawling up my legs. My muscles began to tingle, then ache, as the energy clung to me. I was practically immobilized now, trapped in slow motion just like the rogue Reaper before me. I screamed at my body to respond, then I begged it to move, but this wasn't the kind of story where you could overcome physical obstacles by sheer force of will. I was still too far away, and the only thing I'd be blowing up would be me. A limb found my bundle of dynamite and yanked it away from me. I wanted to scream a denial, but even my mouth had locked up. Except it was a human hand, not a twisted appendage, and the hand's owner came into view. Laszlo. She stood in front of me for a few scant seconds, and the look on her face told me so much in such a small time frame. I know you were trying to save me, it said, because that's what you do. But it's not your turn to do the saving. It's mine. I had no idea how she'd gotten past the monster. Even the Reaper giant seemed surprised by this, if its howl of indignation was any indication. She gave me one final look that I knew to be a goodbye, and then ran for the central mound. I mouthed her name as I watched her run, tried to scream a warning as the battered and misshapen wreck of the Reaper giant struggled after her. It propelled itself on multiple limbs, determined to stop her. But the Lord couldn't touch her like it could touch me, and she'd had a head start. I saw her reach the mound before the monster blocked her from my sight. And that was the last time I ever saw her. The explosion that came seconds later shattered the mound, the latticework, and the giant into thousands of flying fragments. The giant's huge bulk took the brunt of the shrapnel and the blast wave, the power of the blast propelling my tortured body back into the air. At the same time, the portal winked out immediately, the incoming alien world gone from my sight. I felt the clinging energy assailing me splinter and fall away, the voice of the Lord becoming garbled and fragmented, until it went silent. And all this occurred in maybe a second at most. By the time I hit the ground, my mind was already shutting down. I barely felt the bone-wrenching impact as darkness of a different nature engulfed me, one that I was grateful to embrace for once. Epilogue. It's said that one can't dream when you're in a coma. Something about having irregular brain patterns that prevents dreaming. Well, I'm glad for that. I doubt my dreams would have been pleasant. Well, as I'm sure you can guess, I did eventually come out of the darkness and into a bed within a hospital room. I'd been lucky enough to get a window spot, though the sky was storming that day. Rain beat against the windows as I took stock of my body, marveled at my survival once more, and tried to call out to someone. Except my mouth wouldn't move. My throat wouldn't stir. I tried turning my head to look about the room. My neck wouldn't respond. I panicked and attempted to leave the bed, and that's when I got some motion out of my right arm and a little spasm from my left. All I succeeded in doing was knocking over a food tray that someone had absently left positioned next to my bed. The racket managed to attract a health worker's attention from the hallway, so at least I'd succeeded in getting help. Several trying hours later, after a slew of doctors and specialists had come to see the hospital's most famous coma patient wake up, I understood my circumstance. I was in Cascade Limit's General Hospital, and I had arrived there 46 days ago. It was clear that I had lost a great deal of mobility and function. According to my doctor, it wasn't from any serious physical injury. It's true that some level of atrophy was to be expected when you're stuck in bed all that time, but what I had went beyond it. I only really had control of my right arm. My left arm could jerk, but only randomly. They eventually had to put it in a restraining sling to avoid mishaps. I could move my eyes, open my lips enough to get liquid through, and had enough bowel control to avoid wearing diapers. Oh, thank the universe, at least, for a measure of dignity. Madison showed up close to sunset, having accepted the role as my emergency contact since I didn't have any real next of kin. She was wearing civilian clothing for once, and looked like she couldn't decide whether to hug me or kick my ass. She stuffed those emotions down again after remarking how much of an idiot I was for falling into a coma. I tried to smile. I even had a retort ready to go, but nothing happened. She'll really kick my ass for saying this, but When she realized how bad off I was, I saw a tear slide down her cheek. They let Madison stay a long time despite the rule violation it would cause, thinking that having companionship might keep me awake and improve my morale. So she told me everything that happened after. Well, just after. They'd seen the portal open, had witnessed the Lord in its true form as it came to our world. Theo had taken a serious stabbing to his leg, so Madison and Laszlo had to do the heroics, pulling off a last-ditch maneuver where Madison rushed the Reaper giant with nothing but a pistol and harsh language while Laszlo dodged the opposite way. Madison thought Laszlo was merely trying to pull me to safety. She also thought her suicidal rush at the monster was going to be just that, suicide. She'd known her time was up. She'd known it the moment she came down into the sub-level of the base. Such dire certainty afflicts us at all times, but for Madison, she really genuinely thought it was her time. Thus her horror was truly agonizing when the Reaper giant suddenly ignored her and went for Laszlo. Madison's noble sacrifice went up in a blast of cold reality, and she was left with 2 stricken team members within a room quickly growing very dark. Ever the soldier, she attended to Theo and me as best she could. Theo had also gone unconscious, having suffered a concussion as well as his leg wound. The destruction of the Locust constructs didn't just kill the light show though. The blind faded as well, allowing for radio communication once more. It took almost 2 hours for Tanaka's men to get to us, and another 20 hours before we were able to leave the sub-level. This time the surface greeted us with friendly, well-armed faces instead of a horde of MLs. Not only had reinforcements shown up far earlier than expected, but the ML army had largely disbanded by the time they'd arrived at the base. Only a few scattered and disoriented creatures remained, and they were easy targets. The controlling force behind them was gone, reverting the Meat Locusts back to their more primitive natures. Theo spent a week in the hospital for his wounds, his physical ones in any case. Madison decided that she needed to burn off some of her accumulated leave, but in truth she wanted to be around and keep an eye on me. She also kept tabs on Theo as he recovered at home, but he had other family to keep him company. He was never rude to her, but she could tell he didn't want her around much. Madison then informed me that they'd already had Laszlo's memorial service. That news got to me more than anything else. It was like failing to say goodbye to her all over again. Over the next months, I saw Madison a lot in between tests and rehab. She helped me pass my darker days, when I'd fall into myself, lamenting my condition. There were times I wished I'd died with Laszlo rather than endure another day of being manhandled like a mannequin. It helps to have a purpose, namely telling my side of the war. I've learned how to communicate through a computer program where I use my right hand to pick out words and form sentences. I've gotten rather good at it now. This final story was written by my own hand. It took a while, but I do have the time these days. Nobody knows why I'm paralyzed like I am. Dr. Tanaka set me up with some of the best medical experts he knows, but the best they can come up with is that I have neurological damage that rewired or fried parts of my nervous system. It might heal in time, might not. They might be able to fix it one day, might not. I think it was a parting gift from the Lord. It couldn't kill me, but it could forever screw up my life, as if it wasn't already screwed up enough. Madison comes around a lot to my apartment, usually on Sundays. We talk shop most of the time. She still hunts, though the prey is a lot easier to kill these days. I wanted to hope she'd retire after what had happened in the blind, but I don't think she's capable of retirement. She is who she is, a wrangler, to the end of her days. It took a few months, but Theo finally came to visit me. Unlike Madison, he opted to retire from the life, though not entirely. Now he trains and teaches full-time. He told me once that there'll never be another team like Team Abbott, and he's okay with that. We did our part, we paid the price, and it's time for others to take over. He says he doesn't blame me for Laszlo. I believe him because I know he blames himself. If he ever reads this story, I hope he'll listen to me when I say that neither of us could have saved her. It wasn't our job. She was a wrangler. She was a hero, and we honor that, and so we honor her. That's one of the 3 reasons why I spent all these long hours typing out this story with one hand. Madison, Abbott, Theo, Laszlo, and all the others over the years, their tale should be told. The world should know who they are and who they were. The second is to answer a question I got asked by a documentary crew during one of our interviews. It was a young interviewer, and she asked a question that only the young have the nerve to ask. Was it worth it? At the time, I gave her a one-word answer. Maybe. She didn't ask for elaboration, probably because of my condition. And the truth is, maybe is the best answer I have. I don't know if I could have made a different decision and gotten a better life for it. But even now, I still believe that I couldn't have done anything differently. It's not fate, it's just who I am. So maybe is the most honest answer I can come up with. And that leads me to my final reason. A warning. Theo and Madison keep me in the loop on our progress against the Meat Locusts while I surf the net looking in on news feeds and popular opinion. By all appearances, we have the Meat Locusts on the run. Their strategy is completely collapsed, and the surviving creatures have turned to the wilderness, much like they had for decades prior. Good news, of course. People now hope the world will go back to normal, whatever the hell that looks like. But it won't, of course. It never does. No mention of the Lord, though. Despite my testimony and that of Theo and Madison, we had little physical evidence to back up our claims. Dr. Tanaka wasn't exactly leaping to defend our story either. The official conclusion was that the Reapers were behind the creation of the blind, intending to use it to neutralize our technology on a large scale. No one wants to believe how close we were to becoming a cosmic buffet. Hell, there are a lot of people who still don't believe the Meat Locusts exist at all. I suppose I can understand why politicians and military brass would play down the truth. A freaked out public is a chaotic public, and the public already has plenty to freak out about. Because just like the war on terror and the war on drugs, the Meat Locusts are a problem that will never go away entirely. We'll decimate their numbers and seemingly eradicate them at times, but a few of them will find places to hide and wait. They'll wait for humanity to do what it does best. Forget. We like to forget. We want to forget. Doesn't matter how many history books are written, or how much science is taught, or how long our new normal lasts. We want the monsters to go back to their caves so we can pretend they'll never come out again. We want to believe we're at the top of the food chain and that no other life form can beat us. We create philosophies and religions to reinforce this belief. Once the Meat Locusts disappear, they'll become the boogeymen of the past and we'll forget them. But there's no reason why they can't come back. They'll wait, and our children's children will grow up monster-free. They'll stop believing in monsters. And then the MLs will strike, and the Reapers will be born, and the Lord will try for this world once more. Because the Lord knows where we are, and it will never stop trying to get at us. Its hunger never ends. In his book War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells ended the story of a failed Martian invasion of Earth by stating that while humanity had survived the Martians for now, surely the Martians back on Mars would learn from their mistakes and try again. The future of our planet may not belong to us, but to them. Well, I hope we do learn from our mistakes, because I'm damn sure the Meat Locusts will learn from theirs. The end. Well, my dear friends, we finally made it to the end of this epic saga, one of my favourites ever on the channel. Started about a year and a half ago and I finally got there, and thank you so much, all of you, for sticking with me. Well, it's done, so next Sunday on to another series. Not quite sure yet, I still have to finish the werewolves one, don't I? Of course I do. Maybe that'll be next. It should be next, shouldn't it? Something good coming up next Sunday anyway. Well then, my dear friends, till next time, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, If you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.